Hey guys, tonight we're going to squeeze ourselves into the stiff leather boots of a Victorian librarian, and you might want to brace yourself because you're not even going to last an hour. Between the itchy uniforms, the ancient dust, and the passive-aggressive patrons you're in for a lovely little spiral of existential dread wrapped in book glue. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Over. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a smell. Not the scent of books you imagine, old paper and nostalgia. No, this is the Victorian version. Mold tallow soap, and a deep, chalky mildew that's lived in the carpet longer than most of the patrons have been alive. The moment you step into the reading room, your lungs crinkle like overused parchment. The door shuts behind you with the gentle threat of permanence. You're handed your uniform, a wool vest, high-collared shirt, long skirt, or stiff trousers, depending on the day, and a thick black apron with a pocket just big enough to hold a ledger and your dying hope. There's also a soft linen cloth tucked inside. You'll need it. Not to dry your tears that comes later, but to polish the books. Your first assignment is simple. They say, clean the outer bindings of the science section. Easy enough, you think, until you see it. 7 full shelves of medical texts, each the size of a newborn calf. You're handed a shallow bucket of distilled vinegar solution, a pair of thin gloves, so as not to damage the gilt, and a long list of titles. One of the titles is, quite sincerely, Diseases of the Skull, an illustrated reckoning. You don't look inside. You kneel beside the bottom shelf and begin dragging the damp cloth across a spine that crumbles slightly under your touch. The air grows thicker the lower you go. Dust rises in angry puffs, coating your forearms and the inside of your nostrils. You sneeze, but silently. Librarians are not permitted to make disruptive noises. You taste copper, possibly from the blood of your own dignity. A senior librarian passes by. Her name is Mrs. Trellis, and she has not blinked since 1834. She peers down her nose, which is impressive, given you're on the floor, and taps her clipboard. 3 books in 12 minutes, she says. You'll need to improve if you hope to make it through botany by tea. You try to nod, but you're already dizzy. You stand too fast and hit your head on the edge of a shelf. No one notices. Pain is considered character building in this establishment. Time stretches. You polish spines until they stop feeling like books and more like flaky fossils. Your gloves disintegrate halfway through the afternoon. By then your hands are blotched with black ink or possibly spores. You consider licking your finger to turn a page, but remember, the training manual said that counted as contamination by saliva, punishable by written reprimand, and possibly a formal sigh. Around noon, a bell chimes. Lunch. You are allowed precisely 17 minutes. There is no staff room, just a bench near the coal chute, and a plate of stewed turnips covered in muslin to deter the mice. You sit next to another assistant who whispers, "The cataloging ghost spoke to me again." You nod politely and offer them your napkin. You haven't been here long enough to understand which parts are metaphorical and which involve actual spirits. Back inside, your next task awaits wiping every brass label on the poetry carts. These tags are extremely important. One reads Sentimental Ballads BS, and another simply says Forlorn Sea, also Wistful. Each must gleam enough to reflect the disappointment of the person reading it. You work in silence, occasionally adjusting your posture to avoid spine collapse. Your own, not the book's. By late afternoon, your legs have stopped responding in complete sentences. You lean against a bookshelf for support, but it creaks alarmingly. No one rushes to help. In fact, help is not a concept that gets much airtime here. You are alone with only the whisper of pages and the distant sound of someone crying softly into the Canterbury Tales. Before the day ends, you are invited, read assigned, to participate in shelf realignment. This sacred ritual involves moving every book in the reference wing exactly 1 inch to the left to balance the chai. The reasoning behind this is unknown, but tradition must be obeyed even if it means breaking your back and spirit simultaneously. As the gas lights flicker to life, casting long shadows across the marble floor, you're dismissed. But not before being told to brush lint off the globe of the solar system in the lobby. Dust is the enemy of truth, someone mutters behind you. You nod solemnly. You don't know why. You just nod. You stumble outside into the fading twilight. Your face is smudged with ink. Your shoulders ache. And you've developed a deep instinctive fear of Lord Byron's portrait, which seemed to follow you with its eyes all afternoon. But congratulations. You've made it to the end of your first day as a Victorian librarian. And the only thing worse than this is knowing you'll be back tomorrow. The next morning, you return. Not by choice, but because you signed a moral agreement, a charming little paper they call the Oath of Perpetual Orderliness. It was offered to you under the illusion that tea and job security would follow. Neither have arrived. Today's assignment is less physically exhausting, but emotionally devastating. You are now the library timekeeper, which sounds glamorous until you realize it involves ringing a handbell every 15 minutes for 12 straight hours. Why? Because Victorian readers need structure. Because watches are unreliable. Because silence is sacred, but scheduled reminders of its passing are somehow holier. The bell is small brass and already warm from the last person's palm sweat. It smells faintly of cloves and despair. You are told never to ring it with emotion. Not too happily, not too mournfully, just a neutral ding that says time marches on. Please remember to remain spiritually beige. You practice your bell-ringing technique, Mrs. Trellis demonstrates. She lifts the bell with 2 fingers and swings it once exactly 17 degrees. No flare, she warns. This is not a music hall. You nod, and she vanishes possibly through a bookshelf. At first, it seems easy. You sit by the central clock eyes on the pendulum bell, ready. But 15 minutes is longer than you think. It's a cruel stretch of time when you're not allowed to read, speak, or lean. Your only entertainment is watching patrons shift uncomfortably in high-backed chairs, trying not to breathe too loudly near the Encyclopedia Britannica. When the quarter hour arrives, you ring. 1 single chime. Soft. Reverent. A man 2 tables away gives you a nod. Someone else clears their throat in what might be gratitude or indigestion. A child, there are always children mysteriously unaccompanied, looks up and says, "Does the bell mean something bad is about to happen?" You do not answer. Children are not officially allowed conversation here. They may only whisper questions into book spines and hope for divine response. Another 15 minutes. You begin to realize how long 15 minutes really is when you're doing absolutely nothing. You consider blinking Morse code to the woman in the legal studies corner, but she's asleep. Probably meditating. Possibly deceased. Second chime. Someone has moved a chair. The sound echoes like a cannon blast. You glance at the rule ledger. According to page 6, subsection 2 ba. Furniture must remain fixed unless requested in writing. You jot down a note and add it to the misconduct jar, a large ceramic urn where infractions go to die. Time drips. Somewhere near hour 3 you experience your first bell anxiety, a psychological phenomenon wherein you begin to fear ringing it too early, too late, or too enthusiastically. You adjust your grip on the handle, your thumb cramps. Your brain starts humming the tune of the clock's pendulum tick-tock shame shock. 4th chime. A man in a waistcoat glares at you as if you've just insulted his mother's footstool. By lunchtime, you've had 48 minutes of active labor and over 3 hours of active tension. You're offered a cup of broth. It contains a single floating pea and a sprig of thyme. When you ask about bread, someone says bread leads to sloth. You return to your station. The clock ticks louder. You swear it's judging you. You consider setting the bell down and pretending to be a statue, but you've seen what happens to people who go still in here. They're asked to alphabetize theological commentaries by spine curvature. You hold on. At exactly 3:45 p.m., someone drops a book. It's the complete works of Sir Walter Scott, and it lands with a thud so mighty it rattles your soul. Instinctively, you ring the bell 3 times, out of shock, out of habit, out of panic. Everyone looks at you. Silence descends like a Victorian mother-in-law. Mrs. Trellis appears. Her hair is untouched by time. She glides over, holds out her hand. You place the bell in it resigned. You are emotionally compromised, she says. Return tomorrow. Without opinions. Dismissed. You slink out the back head, spinning. The bell still rings in your ears. Somewhere between the chiming hours and the sigh of pressed paper, you've begun to question the structure of time itself. Were minutes always this long? Has the concept of soon lost all meaning? Back in your lodging, no electricity but plenty of draft you write in your notebook. Job includes spiritual erosion via sound. Then you hear something outside. A faint bell. 3 times. You weren't the only one who slipped. The library is especially cold today. Not brisk, not refreshing cold in the way a basement remembers the past. You walk in, rubbing your fingers together even though you're wearing gloves, and feel the immediate judgment of 1,000 books. They don't blink. They don't breathe. But you're certain they know you're the one who misplaced Geological Essays Volume 4 by setting it momentarily on a windowsill yesterday. The guilt is still with you, and in this place guilt behaves like fog, low-clinging, impossible to shake. Today's assignment is deceptively straightforward: identify and report any books with errors. This might sound thrilling, a chance to prove your eye for detail and your reverence for knowledge. But the moment you sit down at the wooden sorting desk, you realize the trap. Every book is a potential minefield. Miss an error, and you're accused of incompetence. But mark something as an error that turns out to be an intentional deviation, say, a forgotten variant spelling of connection, and you've just challenged the Victorians' entire literary orthodoxy. That, in librarian terms, is treason. Your first subject is a battered copy of the modern polymath's primer, its spine soft from overuse, and the corners gnawed by what might have been moths, or possibly existential dread. You flip through the pages, slowly brushing off the loose threads of age. Page 14 refers to the Catalogue of Noble Gases. Your pulse quickens. Catalog U, check a reference guide. No, it really is catalog. A misprint. But is it a printing error or the eccentric spelling of a pre-standardization author? You make a tentative note. You try not to sweat. 2 hours pass. You've found 12 errors. Or possibly none. One title says Observations on Mineral Waters, and now you're convinced you're the one who doesn't speak English correctly. Every time you think you've caught a mistake, doubt creeps in. You begin to hallucinate double L's in words that never had them. Fulfillment traveler canceled. British or error. It's a linguistic minefield, and you're the canary. The worst moment comes when you find a book with two different titles. The spine says Treatise on Steam, but the title page says Treatise on Stern. Is it a typo A forgotten inventor? You bring it to a senior assistant, a pale man named Cyril, who smells of tinned cod and speaks only in footnotes. He squints at the page, adjusts his pince-nez, and says, Stern was a minor Dutch theorist, 1837. Then he adds, but the printer was drunk that month, so it could still be a mistake, or an insult. Then he walks away, humming God Save the Queen in D minor. You return to your desk and stare at the books as if they might confess their secrets voluntarily. They don't. You feel more like a detective than a librarian if detectives weren't allowed to ask questions or make arrests. Instead, you just sit with the mounting suspicion that everyone else knows something you don't. Like how to spell encyclopedia with confidence. At midday, a light lunch is brought in a small bowl of potato mash with a single sprig of parsley meant to stimulate editorial clarity. It doesn't. Your mouth is dry from mouthing words silently, a practice required to catch anomalous rhythms in prose. You think about water. Then you remember water is dangerous. It has been known to warp pages and ruin margins. Water is the enemy here. After lunch, you're sent to the upper gallery to double-check the labeling on the History of British Botany collection. You climb the creaking spiral stairs and step onto the mezzanine, which was designed with exactly zero regard for human comfort. The shelves up here are older, narrower, and taller, stacked to the ceiling. You're handed a wooden pointer, which you must use to gesture at titles rather than touch them. No skin oils, the instructions remind you as though your body is a leaking jar of vinegar. You begin the review. The labels are handwritten in an ink that has faded into sepia memory. One reads, Botanical Britain, 1702 Sodor 1734. The dates are off. You check the ledger and find the range should be 1705 to 1931. You write it down. You then realize the label might refer to the publication dates rather than research dates, which would change everything. You scratch out your note. You make another. Then you scratch that out too. Your ledger now looks like a battlefield of uncertainty. At one point, you spot a label that simply reads Strange Plants, Volume 3. No author, no date, no classification number. Just a lone volume wedged between domestic ferns and a political history of the beech tree. You tilt your head. The book seems to emit a very faint humming sound. You reach for it, then remember no touching. You add a note, strange plants, possibly sentient. You're about to climb down when a child runs through the lower floor shrieking. Everyone gasps. The child is holding what appears to be a pine cone. A pine cone in a library. You are too far away to intervene, but you watch as a librarian in mourning gray intercepts the child, confiscates the pine cone, and leads them away in silence. You are told later that the child was the son of a visiting botanist and was experimenting with unauthorized classification. The phrase is delivered without irony. The rest of your afternoon is spent proofreading pamphlets from the 1820s. Most are treatises on things like moss or the danger of reading by candlelight. One claims that long exposure to scientific curiosity can lead to excessive blinking. Another argues that knowledge of capillaries is inflammatory to young minds. You want to argue with the author, but he's been dead for 160 years. You settle for sighing into your elbow. By the end of the day, you have corrected precisely 2 confirmed errors and falsely marked 4 words as misprints that turned out to be Welsh. Your report will reflect this. The head librarian, a man with hands like dried celery stalks, reads your notes with a disapproving hum. Careful, he says. We don't want to imply the past made mistakes. You're released just before twilight. The sun is low and golden through the stained glass windows, casting long shadows that look like forgotten sentences. You walk past the globe again, pausing to spin it quietly. The South Pacific wobbles under your touch. You wonder if there's a place out there where nobody argues about orthographic variations. Back in your room, you scribble in your own notebook. Job includes ethical confusion about when to correct history and when to preserve it. You realize you've started thinking in footnotes. Your dreams tonight will likely involve a runaway letter U, chasing you through a field of crumbling indexes. You don't mean to yawn, but the body rebels. It's the 4th day, and you haven't had a full breath since Monday. Today's assignment, oh joy, is posture. Specifically, posture maintenance and aesthetic compliance during public reading supervision. This means you'll spend the day sitting very still while watching other people read. But not just sitting correctly. Back, straight shoulders relaxed but not slouched chin. Slightly elevated hands folded demurely in your lap unless otherwise directed. The idea, according to the manual you were given this morning, is to embody scholarly integrity. You glance over the diagram, which includes a drawing of a skeleton wearing a cravat and sitting on a Victorian settee. It does not make you feel better. The head librarian, whom you now refer to privately as Boneface, instructs you to occupy the corner reading perch, a high stool positioned next to a stained glass window, depicting the goddess of knowledge looking vaguely irritated. From here, you are to oversee the quiet room. That name is misleading, of course. It's not quiet in the gentle, relaxing way one might hope, but in the tense, fragile way a balloon is quiet just before it pops. You settle in spine, already protesting. You are not allowed a cushion. You are not allowed to cross your ankles. You are, however, allowed to blink, but no more than once every 6 seconds. Time moves strangely in the quiet room. The gas lamps hum. The air smells of chalk and commitment. The readers before you are frozen statues of intent, a woman in lace gloves mouthing the words of "On the Origin of Species" to herself. A man with a monocle who appears to be sniffing every page of comparative histories of sand. And someone in the corner who may be asleep or astral projecting. You watch. That's your job. Just watch. Every now and then, someone shifts. Not dramatically, just a slight adjustment of their shoulders, a faint tap of the toe, a sharp inhale when the plot thickens. You mark these down on your posture log. There are tiny boxes labeled disturbance intensity and justification. Plausibility. For example, sneezing is a level 2 disturbance. Dropping a bookmark is level 3. Laughing is a 5 unless it's ironic laughter at classical irony, in which case it is a level 4A and must be recorded in Latin. After your first hour, your back is aching. Your seat feels like it's been carved from guilt. You attempt a minor stretch, a subtle roll of the shoulder, and are immediately reprimanded by a passing sub-librarian who places a small folded piece of paper on your knee. It reads, "We do not fidget. We embody calm." You want to crumple it, but instead you add it to your collection of silent humiliations. Mid-morning brings a surprise. One of the readers, a gentleman with a top hat too large for human heads, raises his hand. You rise precisely, no swaying, no groaning, and approach. He whispers, "This book contains humor." You look at the book. It's a treatise on beet farming. You nod, understanding this is a request for reclassification. You escort him to the catalog table and initiate a content adjustment protocol which involves 7 Forms 3 peer reviews and a pencil made from compressed regret. He is satisfied. You are exhausted. Back on your stool, the hours blur. You forget where your spine begins. You start to imagine it detaching, floating above you in protest. You remember the training manual said, posture reflects one's internal spiritual alignment, and you wonder what yours must look like now. Probably like a broken umbrella. Just before lunch, a young woman enters the quiet room carrying romantic poets and their terrible decisions. She walks too quickly. She sits down with too much force. She coughs. You are stunned. A trifecta of transgressions. You mark each one down with shaking fingers. Then she commits the final sin. She removes her gloves before touching the book. You rise, heart pounding, and approach with the caution of a Victorian owl. "Excuse me," you whisper. "May I offer you reading gloves?" She looks at you with the face of someone who has never been offered gloves by a stranger in a waistcoat. They're goat leather, you add. She accepts them, baffled. You retreat in triumph. Lunch, when it arrives, is not so much a meal as a thought. A single slice of cold parsnip pie and a lukewarm barley water. It is served in the reflection nook, a curtained alcove meant for digestive contemplation. You are seated across from another librarian who does not blink. He stares into his cup and murmurs, "Yesterday, someone turned 2 pages at once." You nod solemnly. This is not gossip. This is trauma. After lunch, the head librarian assigns you to Hall B, the children's moral literature wing. Don't be fooled. There are no children. Only books meant for them, parables, fables, improving tales, involving industrious bees and disobedient ducks. You are told to inspect the bindings for emotional strain. What this means is unclear. You begin gently palpating each spine, looking for signs of fatigue or ennui. Some books crackle in protest. One sighs when you open it. You are not surprised. You too would sigh. It is here, in the middle of a shelf labeled Cautionary Ballads for the Melancholic Child, that you discover a page with a handwritten note tucked inside. It reads, "If you're reading this, you've lasted longer than Gregory. He broke on day 3 during origami inventory." You look around. No one sees. You fold the note carefully and return it to its hiding place. Solidarity echoes through the shelves. The day ends mercifully at precisely 6:00 p.m. You file your posture log, submit your behavioral infractions chart, and deposit your cravat into the uniform return box. You exit into the evening light like a paper ghost, drained and silently screaming. On the walk home, your reflection in a shop window startles you. You are stiff to upright. You've become a marionette of etiquette. Your hands naturally fold behind your back. Your chin refuses to drop. You try slouching just once. It feels illegal. You hurry on. At your lodging, you write in your notebook, Job includes becoming the physical manifestation of unread dignity. You soak your feet in cold water and listen to the silence. It doesn't comfort you. It judges. You are beginning to forget what silence used to feel like. Not this curated institutional hush, but real silence, the kind that lives under trees or between waves. Victorian silence isn't natural. It's enforced, trimmed like a hedgerow. Even your thoughts have started to whisper, afraid they might echo. Today, you're told you'll be assigned to the returns desk. It sounds innocent enough, just taking back books, stamping them, placing them on carts. But you're beginning to recognize a pattern. Nothing in this place is ever just what it says on the tin. The returns desk is not a desk. It is a stage. And you are not a librarian. You are a performer in the tragicomic ballet of book repatriation. You arrive to find the desk is a high marble counter taller than your sternum and colder than your career prospects. A single wooden stamp lies in the center beside an ink pad that appears dry since the Crimean War. There's also a candle. Not for light, but for sealing emergency apology scrolls. No one explains what constitutes a book-related emergency. You assume you'll find out the hard way. A long line has already formed. The patrons, respectable men in top hats, widows with lace-trimmed veils, and one woman cradling a tortoise stand silently. One by one, they approach each offering their book with a solemn expression, as if returning a borrowed soul. The first man places Chronicles of the Salt Trade on the desk, but says nothing. You must now inspect the book for wear odor page bending, or, God forbid, unregistered annotation. You open to the middle. Page 213 contains a suspicious smudge. You sniff it. Cocoa. You glance up. The man meets your eyes and nods as if to say, "Yes, I snacked while reading." Judge me if you must. You stamp the return slip and slide it toward him without comment. He tips his hat and disappears into the dust. Next is a boy holding Natural Disasters and How to Profit from Them. It's upside down. You write it gently, only to find a pressed violet between pages 56 and 57. Flowers are not allowed in books. You must now log the incident. There's a special form titled Floral Infiltration Domestic. You mark accidental and release him with a stern whisper. No more blossoms in seismology. The third patron is the tortoise lady. Her book is wrapped in silk. He finds leather distasteful, she explains, stroking the tortoise's shell. You nod as if this is normal. You open the wrapping and find a French pamphlet titled Le Jardin Moral. It is unscathed. You stamp it with a flourish. She smiles and feeds the tortoise a pea. By midday, your hands are stained with half-dried ink. Your wrists ache, and your head swims from the constant flicker of lantern light. Each returned book feels like a test. Some have torn pages. Others smell faintly of pipe smoke or cloves. One comes with a note pinned inside, apologies for the marginalia. I was overcome. The marginalia in question is a 7-page rebuttal to the author's thesis written in rhyming couplets. You debate whether to file it under abuse or enrichment. As you work, a man approaches who looks alarmingly like he hasn't blinked since the Battle of Trafalgar. He presents the illustrated guide to Victorian plumbing and says I found discrepancies in the diagrams. You flip to the index. Sure enough, there's an extra pipe in figure B7. He smiles as if pleased to have proven the book fallible. You offer him a correction form, which he signs with a quill pulled from his coat pocket. You wonder if he brings his own ink to parties. The afternoon brings the return of Lady Delancey, a noblewoman with an intense dislike of alphabetical shelving. She always returns books out of order. You accept her stack ferns of the Empire fundamentals of fortune-telling and filibusters a love story, and gently explain that her books must be processed in accordance with the Dewey Decimal Resistance standards. She sighs. Must everything be numerical, she asks. You do not answer. You simply point to the sign behind you that reads, Order is a form of worship. Eventually, it is your turn to wheel the return cart to the sorting room. The cart has one wobbly wheel and lets out a mournful squeak with every rotation, as if it too disapproves of your trajectory in life. You push it carefully through the hallway past busts of long-dead patrons who funded the annex with fortunes built on marmalade or railway nails. One bust winks at you. Or maybe that was a trick of the gaslight. In the sorting room, you're confronted with a wall of pigeonholes, each labeled with categories so specific they verge on parody memoirs of reformed taxidermists, pre-industrial sea curses, botanical poetry, by height of author. You try to slot the books accordingly, but one simply won't fit. The book is titled, How to Escape a Library. You hesitate, then slip it behind a loose board in the wall. It feels right. The head of cataloging a gaunt woman named Miss Etherbridge, whose neck seems longer than regulations should allow, enters to inspect your placements. She carries a silver whistle that she uses not to summon help, but to indicate misfiled volumes. She blows it once. You flinch. She gestures at your placement of Filibuster's A Love Story. Not romance, she says. Political sabotage. 324.62. You nod amend, and wonder if love and sabotage are always that close. As dusk settles in, you roll the empty cart back, your knees protesting with every step. At the desk, a final patron awaits. He's holding a small red volume bound in velvet. No title, no author. He slides it toward you and whispers, "This was not in the catalog." You open it. The pages are blank. All of them. At the bottom of the last page in fading ink is a single phrase. Some books read you. You look up. He's gone. You place the book in the lost and possibly cursed bin right next to recipes from beyond the wall and the book that refuses to close. You wipe your hands. You exhale. You are done. You step outside the last light of day, catching on the marble lions flanking the main stairs. You descend slowly, spine, aching arms, trembling from an entire day of handling volumes like sacred relics. As you walk home, you try to remember the last time you read for pleasure. It feels like a myth. You pass a bakery and consider buying a roll, but remember your stipend was symbolic. You walk on. Back in your room, you write Job. Includes judging the sins of others via paper margins. You reread the note in your pocket from yesterday, the one about Gregory. You wonder what origami inventory was, and whether you'll survive it when your turn comes. The library is darker than usual this morning. Not in the metaphorical sense, though truthfully that wouldn't be wrong, but in the very literal you stumble into a shelf and apologize to it kind of way. The gas lights are flickering uncertainly, casting long warping shadows that seem just a bit more curious than they ought to be. You're told there's a plumbing issue in the lower levels, and the steam has unsettled the flames. This explanation doesn't comfort you. Nothing about unsettled flames ever does. You've been assigned to the archives today. The word sounds elegant, almost exciting, like it might involve secret documents and whispered codes. It doesn't. What it actually means is this: you will descend into a series of low-ceilinged rooms that smell like wet parchment and Victorian fear, and you will spend the next 9 hours dusting. Not browsing, not cataloging, not even organizing, just gently, reverently, eternally dusting. The entrance to the archives is through a door that looks exactly like a bookshelf. To enter, you must press the false copy of Poultry and the Empire until it clicks. You're accompanied by a junior clerk named Hubert, who carries a small lantern and an enormous key ring. He doesn't speak unless absolutely necessary. When you thank him for unlocking the door, he simply nods like someone who once thanked a wall and received a prophecy in return. The archives are quiet in a different way than the reading rooms. Here, the silence feels thick, damp, and slightly accusatory. The shelves are taller, closer together, and packed with volumes that have not been touched in over a century. Some are wrapped in cloth. Some have locks. One is chained to the floor. You ask if you should be concerned. Hubert says, "Only if it rattles." You begin with the history section. Not modern history, not even classical. This is speculative prehistory, a shelf containing works such as A Romantic Theory of Volcanoes, Unicorns, Economic Impact in Early Trade Routes, and the ever-mysterious Atlas of Unconfirmed Archipelagos. Your job is to remove the dust without inhaling it and lightly brush the covers with a horsehair tool known as the respectful whisk. If you find any mold, you must inform a specialist, not act on your own. Mold removal is a certified task. Apparently, in 1876, someone attempted to clean a mildew-ridden Bible and dissolved half of Genesis. As you dust, you notice the labels are handwritten in 4 different scripts, some faded, some vibrant. The catalog numbers make no sense. One book is listed as 5C2 Fear. Another simply has the number written in red ink. You note these down, then stop when you realize there is nowhere to submit the list. The archives don't report to cataloging. They report to something called the index, which may or may not be a person. Mid-morning, you encounter your first anomaly. A book titled Guide to Non-Existent Rivers opens to reveal pressed leaves, small and silver, crumbling to the touch. They don't match any known species. You start to log the discovery, but the paper in your notebook turns slightly translucent. You close the book unsure whether to feel honored or cursed. Further in, you find the glass case. Every archive has one you're told. This one contains the librarian's ledger, an oversized volume bound in green leather with clasps made of what looks disturbingly like fingernail. You're not allowed to open it. No one is. Not even Boneface. You're only allowed to dust the outside gently with circular motions. As you do, you feel a strange vibration in your hand, like the book is humming. Or breathing. You decide not to ask Hubert about it. Lunch is delivered in silence. A tray appears at the top of the archive stairs with a bell. You find a sandwich with exactly 1 slice of cheese and an apple that appears to be mostly theoretical. Hubert eats a single cracker and writes in a small notebook titled Nourishment Log 1894, Present. You eat quietly, eyes scanning the nearest titles, including Whale Thoughts and Other Maritime Sermons and How to Measure Rain with Only Regret. After lunch, the lights dim further. The steam problem has escalated, and the archives now resemble a poorly managed Victorian spa. Your dusting cloth is damp. The air smells of candle soot and unresolved mysteries. You begin work on the locked shelf, which holds books that were once challenged or banned, not for content, but for emotional volatility. Titles include The Book That Cried and Why We Don't Speak of Alphabetical Order Anymore. Some of the locks are simple. Some require keys you don't possess. One requires a riddle which you are not authorized to solve. Near the end of your shift, you come across a journal wedged behind a large volume on mineral whispering. It's slim, bound in red, felt, and unsigned. Inside are entries from a former librarian. They detail days, much like yours, dusting, sorting, wondering. But toward the end, the entries change. There are more books than there were yesterday, one says. They multiply at night. I hear the bindings creak when the lights go out. another entry found a second version of myself in the mirror behind the philosophy wall. We agreed to take turns. The final entry is written upside down. It reads, "Only don't open the green one again." You put the journal back exactly where you found it. You do not ask questions. You do not mention it to Hubert. You do, however, check the green book again just to be sure. Still locked, still humming, at exactly 5:59. Hubert nods toward the exit. The gaslights flicker once more as if grateful to be relieved of their duty. You follow him out. As the bookshelf door closes behind you, you feel the pressure change. The world above ground is lighter, faster. You blink and realize your legs are sore from standing still. Your wrists ache from respectful whisking. You are carrying several new allergies, and possibly a ghost. On your way home, you stop at the edge of a park and just sit. You listen to birds, to wind, to dogs barking somewhere far off. And you realize that for 9 hours you forgot these things existed. You lived in paper, you lived in mildew. You lived between the lines of books that no longer wanted to be read. You write in your notebook, job includes negotiation with time and temperature, and things that do not blink but still watch. You sleep that night with your window open, just in case. It's been a week. At least you think it has. Time in the library moves like ink in water, slow, uncertain, prone to pooling in corners. Your internal clock now operates on the schedule of candle melting and digestive discomfort. Today, you're told you've been honored with a special duty. You're to clean and maintain the restricted section more commonly known among staff as the place where books go to lie about being harmless. The assignment comes from Miss Etherbridge herself. She arrives just after dawn, pale as a vellum bookmark, and clutching a small brass key on a velvet ribbon. "You've demonstrated a steady hand," she says, which is true. Your hand no longer shakes not because you've grown more confident, but because you've forgotten what nerves feel like. Be precise. Be respectful. Be brief, she adds. Then she walks away, trailing the faint smell of thyme and possibly grave dirt. You're led to the western wing, past the mural of St. Jerome looking disapprovingly at a squirrel, and into a stone corridor lined with small plaques. One reads, "Here resides the Whispering Index, 1794, 1822. Another, "Do not knock." You don't. The key turns easily in the iron lock. The door creaks open, not dramatically, but in the same way someone sighs after waking from a long, uneasy dream. Inside, the lighting is dimmer than necessary. No gas lamps, only 2 lanterns mounted to the wall burning with a strange greenish hue that makes you look slightly ill in reflection. The room itself is square, high-ceilinged, lined floor-to-ceiling with black wooden shelves. No book titles are visible. Each volume is wrapped in a cloth cover and labeled only with a Roman numeral and a sigil you don't recognize. You've been provided with a small chart to track your progress. The chart notably ends at Ethinthes. There are 23 books. You begin with I. The cloth is heavy, almost waxy. You remove it slowly, revealing a thick book bound in snakeskin. The title is etched in faint silver observations upon dreams of the illiterate. You're not allowed to open it. You dust the cover gently with a separate brush boar hair not hoarse as per protocol and return the cloth. Setas is lighter bound in green silk. It's a guide to inexplicable silences. You notice it grows warm when you touch it. You mark the temperature on your form. As you work, you begin to feel watched. Not the paranoid kind, not even the "there's a rat behind the book cart" kind. It's the specific sensation of being seen with intention. You glance at the lanterns. The flames don't flicker. You glance at the books. They don't move. But every time you turn around, you swear the space between shelves has narrowed. You reach book 7. The sigil on this one is a spiral pierced by an arrow. The cloth is a deep burgundy and slightly damp. You hesitate. Something about the book feels heavy in the air. You don't unwrap it. Instead, you log 7 untouched. Recommend review by senior personnel, possibly breathing. At this point, your head begins to ache. A dull throb right behind the eyes. You try not to panic. You've read about this in the training pamphlet Sensory Overload in Forbidden Wings. Symptoms include nausea, tinnitus, and a sudden desire to speak in outdated tongues. You drink water from your hip flask, focus on your breathing, and recite the library motto under your breath, order. Knowledge. Restraint. You're on book duanes when you hear it a soft, rhythmic rustling, like pages turning themselves. But nothing moves. You walk to the far shelf where book 19 sits. You haven't reached it yet. The cloth on this one is askew. You try to adjust it, but as your fingers touch the cover, you feel resistance. Not from the book, but from your own muscles. As if your body instinctively knows don't. You step back. The rustling stops. There's a bell by the door for requesting assistance. You ring it once. You wait. You ring it again. A voice calls down the hall. Not a person, not words. Just acknowledgement. 2 minutes later, Hubert arrives holding a replacement lantern and what appears to be a journal sealed in wax. You're exceeding your allotted exposure, he says. You nod. You feel it too. Your thoughts are beginning to scatter like mice underfoot. He guides you out carefully, like someone escorting a sleepwalker away from a cliff. As the door to the restricted section closes behind you, you feel an almost audible click in your chest, like something releasing its grip. You didn't even realize you were holding your breath. Miss Etherbridge meets you in the corridor. Did it speak to you? She asks, eyes unreadable. You shake your head. Good, she says, it only lies. You are given the rest of the day off, which is a trick. Day off means being sent to the conservatory wing to refresh your senses, which it turns out involves sorting dried herbs alphabetically by scent. You spend 3 hours sniffing crumbling lavender brittle rosemary and something labeled courage dried. You sneeze 36 times and are commended for your resilience. That night you dream of Roman numerals. They chase you crawling over the walls, hissing book titles in languages you don't know. You wake up with ink on your hands. You didn't write anything down. You check your notebook anyway. One new line has appeared. We open what opens us. You tear out the page, burn it in a teacup, and go back to bed. It's raining this morning, but not the soft, cleansing kind of rain. This is Victorian rain, persistent, judgmental, and slightly sooty. You arrive at the library soaked from the knees down, despite carrying an umbrella large enough to be mistaken for a portable gazebo. Your boots squish with each step on the marble tiles. No one comments. Everyone squishes. It's tradition. Today's assignment is on paper deceptively pleasant. You're told you'll be working with the children's section. You imagine storybooks, soft chairs, perhaps the occasional chaos of a jam-covered bookmark. But the children's section in the Victorian Library is not a place of joy. It is a proving ground. Not for the children, but for you. There are no actual children present, of course. Not today. They are only allowed on Thursdays and only in supervised pairs. Instead, you will be inspecting, categorizing, and filing a collection of morality tales meant to instruct children in the ways of virtue silence and passive existential dread. The section is marked Moral Literature for the Young and Easily Startled. You enter through a narrow wooden archway shaped like a lecturing adult. The room smells like dried flowers and disappointment. The books are thin, fragile things. Paper covers, stitched bindings. Illustrations that appear to have been drawn by someone who had never seen a child but once heard a description of one through a tin funnel. Your job is to organize them not by subject or author, but by the severity of lesson imparted. There is a chart. The lowest tier, mildly corrective, includes titles like The Boy Who Forgot His Cravat and Why Miss Eliza Cried at Supper. The middle tier, properly chastening, contains Sarah and the Sin of Sneezing and the tale of Timothy's temporal arrogance. The final tier is morally absolute and features such gems as Jonah and the Door. He opened without asking, and Lucy, who loved butter too much, which ends quite literally in a cow-based haunting. You begin with Henry's Half-Truths. It's 17 pages long, mostly dialogue between Henry and a talking wall. The moral is unclear. You place it under Properly Chastening. Next is The Girl Who Smiled at the Clockmaker, which appears to be a warning about the dangers of politeness when performed at incorrect social intervals. You stare at the final line, and so the bell tolled for her premature elegance, and decide that one belongs firmly in morally absolute. By midday, you've reclassified 27 titles, all while trying not to smudge the brittle pages with your increasingly clammy fingers. You're wearing gloves, but the gloves are damp from rain and now smell faintly of boiled wool and regret. You remove them briefly to stretch your hands and are immediately reprimanded by a librarian passing by with a tray of pickled beets. The children's books are porous, she hisses. They remember. Lunch is served in the children's reading annex, a round room with low stools, tiny tables, and a mural of cherubs crying into a well. Your meal is a lukewarm turnip broth and a biscuit so dry you consider filing it as a brittle manuscript. You eat quickly, surrounded by empty chairs and the ghost of cautionary tales. You swear you hear someone whisper, "Don't dawdle," from under the table. You do not check. After lunch, your task changes. You are to prepare for Thursday's child literacy visit. You're handed a large wooden crate labeled Instructional Aids. Inside, you find one wax doll dressed as Queen Victoria, a felt board for displaying behavioral trajectories, a set of flashcards featuring moral dilemmas like, is it ever okay to want a balloon and a puppet shaped like an abacus? You will be in charge of story time, though you're told not to read anything too entertaining. Enthusiasm in this context is subversive. You're advised to keep your tone measured with a cool reverence for structure. You practice reading aloud from The Little Girl Who Lost Her Bonnet and Then Her Brother. The illustrations are haunting, wide-eyed children, looming doorways, inexplicable shadows. You try to read with the approved tone, but your voice cracks halfway through the sentence. And so God took him instead. You cough, adjust, and try again. Then you must test the response chart. It's a large poster where children are meant to place colored stickers indicating how much the story affected them. Options include shameful, enlightening, troubling in ways I cannot name, and will repress for later. You pin it to the wall and step back. It tilts slightly. You try to fix it, but the paper tears. You're told to file an incident of emotional misalignment report. You do so using the pink form marked for feelings only. The rest of the afternoon is spent preparing the lecture puppet. You're told to rehearse the consequences monologue, which is to be delivered in the voice of the abacus. The monologue is 5 minutes long and ends with the line, "And that, children, is why we catalog even our thoughts." You finish your shift exhausted, slightly hoarse, and burdened by the weight of imaginary children's moral development. As you return your gloves and log your daily hours 7.5, not including biscuit chew time, you spot a book left on the sorting table. It has no cover. Inside are scrawled notes in childlike handwriting lines like, "I did nothing wrong, and they made me eat the idea of cake." You close it and mark the spine file under potentially autobiographical fiction. Then you place it on the shelf between Sadness in the Attic and The Boy Who Preferred Questions. You leave the library under a sky still heavy with rain. A child passes you on the street, skipping with a hoop. You want to ask them if they've ever read The Chair That Bit Back, but you don't. You let them keep their joy. At home, you write in your notebook, Job includes deciphering the ethics of biscuits. You underline the word biscuits 3 times. You circle it once. You go to bed early and dream of being chased by a felt puppet holding a ledger. You arrive early today, not by ambition, but because your lodging's boiler began wheezing at dawn, and you mistook it for the library's morning bell. By the time you realize your error, you're already dressed, boots on bag, packed, and halfway through a piece of toast that tastes exactly like historical footnote. It's fine. You've grown used to mornings that begin with disappointment and toast. The assignment awaiting you is cataloging, which sounds almost soothing, after the emotional ringer of yesterday's puppet monologue. You are to assist the primary indexing clerk with a backlog of titles that, for reasons never fully explained, were lost in the system sometime in the 1830s. You're led through the usual maze of corridors past the statue of Queen Victoria, frowning at a book she allegedly never read, and into the indexing hall. It's a large, echoing space filled with long tables, drawers that stretch to the ceiling, and an atmosphere of general bureaucratic menace. Your supervisor today is Mr. Twill. He has no visible eyebrows and communicates primarily through the arrangement of pencils on his desk. 3 pencils parallel, proceed, 2 at an angle, pause, all in a cup, panic. Currently, 3 pencils lie side by side, so you begin. The books arrive on a rolling cart stacked precariously. Most are odd sizes, tiny manuals on ostrich farming, oversized atlases of imaginary colonies, several that appear to be part of an incomplete encyclopedia, written by someone with a grudge against the letter G. Your job is to record title author, if possible, year approximate, and intent. That last one gives you pause. You ask Mr. Twill what it means. He holds up a 4th pencil. You don't ask again. You open the first book. It's bound in green felt and smells faintly of licorice. The title is Nods and Their Implications. The author is a former nodist. There is no date. The content is simply a list of various nodding styles from apologetic but firm to potentially treasonous. You assign the year as uncertain but post-hat, and mark the intent as interpersonal diplomacy. Next comes Leaves from an unread diary. There are no words, only smudges, the occasional ink blot, and pressed beetles in various states of decay. You don't know how to catalog this. Mr. Twill sees your hesitation and moves a pencil half an inch to the left. You take this as encouragement. You mark the author as Anon, or Bugs, and the intent as therapeutic or entomological. Book after book follows. Some make sense. The naval etiquette of landlocked princes is oddly coherent. How to speak to a goat and mean it is not. One volume is just a hollowed-out dictionary containing a single spoon. You log it under metaphor, possibly accidental. You begin to feel a rhythm, strange but satisfying. Open, observe, interpret file. Then you come across something new. A book with no cover, no spine, and no pages, just a leather binding filled with what appears to be sand. You turn it carefully. The sand shifts. On the inner surface of the binding, someone has etched the phrase, "If you know how to read this, please stop." You look up. Mr. Twill is watching you with both hands on the desk. No pencils in sight. You close the book and place it in the box labeled Pending Philosophy. Around midday, a bell rings. This is not the usual chime of break time. It's a slow, reverberating clang that means only one thing, senior audit. All cataloging must stop. All pens must be placed in the drawer. All staff must stand behind their chairs. The auditors enter 2 minutes later, 4 figures in dark coats, each carrying a small booklet titled Verifiability and Its Enemies. They walk slowly along the tables, pausing to examine handwriting spacing, and even the placement of book stacks. One auditor lifts a book you recently logged, a survey of lakes that might be watching us. She flips through it, sniffs the spine, and makes a note. You resist the urge to explain the Beatles. She moves on. After their inspection, you're cleared to resume work. Mr. Twill rearranges his pencils into a new configuration, 1 pointing toward you, 2 pointing away. You believe this means carry on, but doubt yourself. You do. Your next book is a thin volume bound in bark. The title reads The Forest's Complaint. The author is listed as an oak. Inside are poems written in iambic pentameter, all about soil erosion and squirrels who gossip. It's genuinely moving. You write botanical lamentation under intent, then pause. That seems too poetic. You revise it to naturalist expressionism. Then, feeling bold, you underline it. Late in the afternoon, you are handed a stack of uncatalogued index cards. Each card contains the summary of a book that doesn't seem to exist. Titles include The Man Who Sneezed in Parliament, Accidental Sorcery for Beginners, and Volume 3 of Things Best Left Alone. You are told to match them with likely candidates. You do your best placing Accidental Sorcery next to a book on turnip fermentation that smells faintly of burnt hair. As the day draws to a close, you feel a strange kind of satisfaction. Not joy exactly, but the muted relief of a task survived. You've held knowledge in your hands. You've filed it, named it, even doubted it a little. And somehow, in this bizarre little ritual of ink and ambiguity, you feel momentarily real. You leave the indexing hall as the sun sets, though the windows are so dusty, you only know this because the lamps begin to sputter. Mr. Twill nods once. All 3 pencils point inward. You suspect it's a compliment. That night you dream of drawers that never end, of cards that shuffle themselves, and of a librarian made entirely of erasers who says you forgot the intent. You wake in a cold sweat, then write in your notebook. Job includes naming what refuses to be named. You underline refuses twice. The sky is gray again today, but it's a different kind of gray one that feels like it's leaning slightly toward green. You mention this to no one, of course. The last person who described the weather in metaphorical terms was asked to write a 3-page apology in non-figurative language and copy it into the visitor log for posterity. So you simply lower your head, pull your scarf tighter, and march onward. Another day, another duty, When you arrive, there's a note pinned to the staff board. It's short-handwritten and suspiciously free of punctuation. Volunteer needed for map room orientation immediately. No one moves. You make the mistake of reading it out loud. A supervisor hears. "Ah, splendid," they say. "We knew you'd be keen. You are not keen. But you are trapped. You are led to a room you've never entered before, though you've passed its door countless times, a heavy slab of oak with an engraving above that reads Cartographia Cautionem. Below it, scratched faintly into the wood, are the words, "Do not fold time." The map room is colder than the rest of the library. Not physically, though the temperature is indeed lower, but emotionally. It feels like a room that knows secrets and doesn't want to share them. You step inside and are hit with the smell of old ink beeswax and something faintly metallic like coins that remember being swords. There are maps everywhere, rolled in tubes, folded into drawers, hung like tapestries, stitched into floor rugs, even scrawled across the underside of a glass table. Not all are recognizable. Some show familiar landscapes, Europe, the colonies, ancient Rome. Others do not. You spot one labeled The Empire of Regret, another simply titled Beneath the Ice, Beneath That. One is blank until you breathe on it. A river appears winding slowly through a town called Whisperley. Your guide for the day is a woman named Mrs. Pratt, who wears 6 brooches and no expression. She hands you a ledger and says, "Do not rearrange anything unless it has already asked to be moved." You begin to ask how one tells when a map has asked, but she's already gone. Your first task is inventory. You move from drawer to drawer, carefully unrolling each map, noting its condition medium parchment. Vellum silk, occasionally bark and subject. Some are straightforward. A map of the Thames from 1812, accurate and water-stained. A faded plan of Constantinople annotated in a crabbed hand that insists the cisterns are full of whispers. You write it down anyway. Then there are the others, the ones that shift. One map shows a coastline with a single lighthouse. You blink. Now there are 2. You check your hands for ink poisoning and continue. Another depicts a garden that appears normal until you tilt it toward the light, then the paths rearrange like ants fleeing daylight. You label this one responsive. You're told later the correct term is cartolastic. By midday, your head hurts from squinting and the constant need to refold maps according to emotional crease memory, which turns out to be a real filing system. If a map was once folded with regret, it must never be folded with pride. If it was once torn in haste, it must be stored gently but never taped. There are charts for this. You do not understand them. You follow them anyway. During your break, you eat beside the panoramic mural known as the Compromise Atlas. It shows an ever-changing world somewhere between fantasy and cartographic diplomacy. Countries appear and vanish depending on who is in the room. You stare at a tiny island labeled You Maybe and decide not to mention it. After lunch, you're assigned to sort the theoretical drawers. These contain maps of places that don't exist yet. Each is labeled with a probability rating and a brief description. One reads 95%. Future peninsula to emerge post-glacial shift. Do not speak aloud. Another 12%. City of echoes. Coordinates unstable. You wonder who calculates these probabilities. Then you find a drawer labeled uncertain until noted and decide you don't want to know. The final drawer is locked. You are not given a key. Instead, you are told to sit near it and observe. So you do. For 30 minutes. Nothing happens. Then, just before you're about to give up the drawer, shifts slightly. A thin sound like a paper-cut sigh escapes. The lock unlatches on its own. Inside is a single map. It's a small square and drawn on a strange material, part parchment, part skin. The ink is faint. The lines don't represent roads or rivers, but decisions. Each branch forks, twists, loops back. The legend says, "A guide to choices made too late." You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. You place it back carefully. The drawer clicks shut. Mrs. Pratt returns to collect your ledger. She glances at your notes and raises one eyebrow slightly when she sees your mention of the decision map. "That one's never opened for me," she says. "Must have taken a liking to you." Then she leaves without another word. You exit the map room, slowly, brain buzzing with too much information and not enough certainty. As you walk past the main stairwell, you see a familiar child peering into the globe. The same one from the reading room 2 days ago, the one who asked about bad things happening. He turns, smiles, and says, "Did you see the road where you turned left instead of right?" You blink. He's gone. At home, you write in your notebook. Job includes keeping track of things that have never happened and possibly never will. You draw a small map of your own, just lines, arrows, a river that leads nowhere. You fold it with care, with doubt, and slide it into the back of your notebook. You dream that night of corridors with no doors, staircases that ascend in slow spirals, and a voice that says, "All maps are confessions." Some just use more ink. You're handed a box this morning. Not a task, not a folder, not a politely ominous scroll, an actual physical wooden box. It's roughly the size of a shoebox, sealed with brass hinges, and bears a faded inscription burned into the lid, "Return only if remembered." Beneath that, a smaller line for use in the hall of misplaced books. You blink, waiting for clarification. None arrives. The clerk who gave it to you is already halfway down the hall, whistling something that sounds suspiciously like "God Save the Dewey Decimal System." You've never heard of the Hall of Misplaced Books. You've heard of lost volumes, borrowed archives, even the temporary shelf of perpetual delay, but never this. You ask 3 senior staff members. One squints, one shrugs, and the third simply says, "You'll know when you've gone too far." So you go. Down corridors you've never entered. Past a door marked "Books that Misbehave." Down a staircase lit by swinging lamps and lined with oil portraits of authors who look increasingly confused the deeper you descend. One of them, possibly a Bronte, seems to blink as you pass. You try not to blink back. Eventually, you reach it. The hall is long, narrow, slightly curved. The ceiling is low, the air warm and oddly sweet like the smell of dry hay and distant jam. The shelves here are unlike any others in the library. Instead of orderly rows, they zigzag. Some curve, some double back on themselves. A few rise vertically like trees. The labels are nonsense, kind of not quite fiction. Probably meant well misfiled by love. You're instructed by a note pinned to a lampshade to walk slowly. The hall prefers a gentle pace, it reads. You adjust your stride. The box in your arms feels heavier the longer you carry it, as if it absorbs confusion. You don't try to open it. You suspect it contains something that once forgot itself, and you'd rather not disturb its rediscovery. Your job is to locate the books in this hall, identify them if possible, and assign a probable placement. You're given a small slate board and a stick of chalk. Computers are not allowed here. Pens are frowned upon. Memory is preferred, though not trusted. The first book you examine is small bound in blue felt and completely blank. No title, no writing, just a thin thread sewn into the spine. You shake it gently. A small scrap of paper falls out. I meant to say something, it reads. You catalog it as intentional silence and mark its placement as almost memoir. The next is more familiar. The Manual of Polite Accidents, 3rd edition. You read the opening paragraph and immediately understand why it ended up here. It details the appropriate response to knocking over a bishop during a garden party curtsy, not bow, and the etiquette of sneezing in alphabetical order. You place it under correct, but only technically. Then there's the odd one, a book that insists on every page that it is not a book. I am a window, says page 1. I am a hallway, says page 2. By page 25, it declares itself a conceptual sneeze. You stop trying to classify it and log it simply as genre denial persistent, and still the box remains unopened. You carry it as you work the way a librarian might carry a grudge carefully, wordlessly, close to the chest. At one point, you find a shelf labeled Books That Arrived Without Pages. Every volume is empty. But when you touch the spines, you feel something heat, maybe, or pressure. You open one and see only this. If you had written me, what would I have said? You close it slowly. By mid-afternoon, you've grown used to the hall's peculiar logic. You find a rhythm step, pause, browse, classify, wonder. The books seem to sense your effort. One reshelves itself as you pass nestling into a spot marked almost poetry. Another opens to reveal a pressed daisy and a note that says, "You were kind to me once." You file that one under Personal Histories Unverified. Then you reach the end of the corridor, or at least what you think is the end. The shelf here is empty, save for a single slot labeled "To be named." It feels right. You place the box there. It fits. The weight leaves your arms like a sigh. The shelf creaks gently like a door closing in another room. You step back. There's no fanfare, no whisper of thanks. But as you turn to leave, you notice something new on the wall, freshly scratched in faint ink found today. Remembered gently. You don't smile, you just nod. On your way out, you pass the same shelves. Some have shifted. One now bears your handwriting. You didn't write it. Not consciously. It reads, "Things we shelve when we cannot say them out loud." You exit the hall and return to the surface slower than before. Not from exhaustion, though yes, that too, but from the realization that you may have placed something of yourself on those shelves, and that it might stay there quietly waiting to be read. That night, your notebook entry is brief. Job includes giving lost stories a place to rest. You fall asleep quickly, dreamlessly, as if something in the hall took your burden with it. There is something unusual about today, and you know it the moment you enter the building. The library is too quiet. Not the usual reverent hush, but a deep anticipatory stillness. The kind of silence that happens just before a thunderstorm or just after someone's made a mistake they haven't realized yet. You stand in the vestibule, coat dripping onto the checkerboard floor, and wait for something to move. Nothing does. Even the grandfather clock has paused its pendulum mid-swing as if holding its breath. Your name has been written, yes, written on the assignment board in red chalk. No one else's name is there, just yours. Underneath a single instruction, Special Inventory Attic Collections. The word attic is underlined. Twice. You didn't know the library had an attic. You're given a ring of keys and a packet of instructions bound with twine. The envelope is marked, "Do not open unless at elevation." Of course. You ascend. You climb 6 flights of stairs that narrow progressively, then a 7th that is more ladder than stair. At the top is a trap door set into the ceiling. The final key on the ring unlocks it with an unsettlingly wet click. You push upward. The attic smells of beeswax and dust and things unsaid. It is wide but low-sloping under the roofline, and lit only by small arched windows and the dim orange flicker of oil lamps left burning in sconces that haven't been cleaned in decades. Every surface is covered in cloth draped over piles and shelves and curious shapes. Nothing is labeled. The air is warm. Your scalp itches before you even move. You open the envelope. Inside is a list of categories. Heirlooms of staff donated memories. Books, 2 personal items that refused classification. 1 chair haunted. You are instructed to count, not touch. But you're also instructed to reconcile discrepancies, which implies touching will at some point be required. You begin with the nearest shelf. It holds what appears to be a stack of tiny boxes, each labeled with a year and a name. 1902, Harold Regret. 1919, Florence Grief Small. 1933, Unknown Shame Misplaced. You count them. 42 in total. You note it in the ledger. You do not open any. One hums faintly. You move on. The next pile is not books, but garments. Librarian uniforms from across the ages arranged on headless mannequins. Some wear capes. One sports a collar high enough to block peripheral vision. All have pockets, and all pockets appear full. You find a note tucked into one labeled Bertram, 1874. It says, check the ceiling at noon. You check your watch. 11:58. You continue. There's a stack of journals tied together with a ribbon labeled Books We Wrote But Never Admitted. You recognize one of the titles. It's something you dreamt once. You do not open it. You count 12 volumes. One shifts as you walk by. You say, excuse me, on instinct. At noon, you look up. There's a panel in the attic ceiling. It swings downward without a sound. A small envelope drops and lands at your feet. You hesitate, then open it. Inside is a single sentence. Inventory is not the same as understanding. You nod. You already knew that. Further in the attic grows stranger. You find a shelf labeled Unsaid Apologies. It's just envelopes. Hundreds of them. Some sealed, some burned around the edges. One reads, for the bookmark I never returned. Another for saying quiet meant peace. You count each one aloud softly, like naming stars. You reach 213 before you stop. The last envelope in the row has your name on it. No return address. You leave it unopened. Next is a table marked Objects that belonged to no one. On it, a single glove, a teacup full of pennies, a rusted key, and a small wooden horse missing one leg. They sit like artifacts at rest, waiting for context. You record their presence, their arrangement, the fact that one, the teacup, appears slightly warmer than the others. You do not ask why. There is a final corner to the attic. It's the darkest, the quietest. A single chair sits there, velvet-covered and facing the wall. It is the one mentioned in the instructions, the haunted one. You are instructed to acknowledge it gently. You stand beside the chair. You nod. Hello, you say. The chair does not move, but something in the room exhales. You feel it in your bones. On the way out, you count one last shelf. Books without titles. Dozens of them. Spines blank. Pages filled with neat, careful handwriting in languages you've never seen. Some look like music. Some like Braille. Some like water stains arranged with intent. You mark them under linguistic orphans. The final book opens slightly as you pass. The page says, "You remembered me." You close it again. You descend slowly, careful not to disturb anything else. At the bottom of the ladder, the clerk from this morning is waiting with a cup of tea. Everything where it should be, he asks. You nod. Good, he says. Sometimes the attic needs to know it hasn't been forgotten. That night, you write in your notebook, job includes remembering what others chose to forget. You place the notebook on your desk, and just before sleep you whisper a thank you to the chair, the book, the attic. You don't expect an answer. But the next morning your boots are dry, though it rained all night. You're back in the central reading room today. It should feel familiar. Long oak tables, floor-length green curtains. Readers hunched over thick volumes, like penitents in silent confession. But nothing in this library stays familiar for long. The assignment this time isn't shelving, cleaning, or cataloging. It's observational rotation. In layman's terms, you are to walk the perimeter of the room at regular intervals, observe behavior, and record deviations from scholarly expectations. You ask what counts as a deviation. The answer, delivered with a meaningful glance and a 300-page policy manual, is, "You'll know." You are issued a clipboard, a stub of pencil, and a small whistle for emergency decorum breaches. You are told never to blow it unless someone is actively dancing. Has this happened before you ask? Once the supervisor says darkly, "They brought a violin," you begin your circuit. The room is large, echoing with the soft rustle of turning pages and the occasional creak of a stiff collar. The lamps glow like thoughts not yet formed. Each reader is an island of focus adrift in a sea of silence. You make your notes carefully. Table 1, man reading Latin dictionary upside down. Possibly intentional. Monitor. Table 3, young woman cross-referencing 2 books with intensity bordering on combustion. Excellent posture. No action required. Table 5, person appears to be asleep but is blinking in slow intervals. Maybe practicing meditative grammar. At table 8, you pause. The reader, a middle-aged man with a waxed mustache and a tragic cravat, is flipping through a book titled Why Punctuation Killed the Empire. Every few pages he snorts, not laughs, snorts, short, sharp exhales of disbelief. You hesitate, then log Table 8 expressive breathing. Category, literary dissent. You do not intervene. Yet. At Table 11, someone is reading a book you've never seen before. The title reads, "This is not the page you're looking for." Each time they turn a page, the previous one disappears. You note the occurrence, then glance up to find the reader staring back at you, eyes wide. You blink. They blink. Then they return to reading. You decide to leave Table 11 alone. You complete the first circuit, then begin again. This time, you walk slower. The air is heavier now, full of stillness so deep it feels almost alive. You notice small things, the way some readers mouth the words, how others tap their fingers in patterns that may or may not correspond to obscure poetic meter. One reader appears to be translating the entire Aeneid into semaphore using only eyebrow movements. You are impressed. You make a note. Midway through your third rotation, someone drops a pen. The sound is deafening. A collective intake of breath follows. You hurry over. The offender, a boy no older than 12, stares at the pen like it betrayed him. You kneel, retrieve it, and hand it back silently. He mouths sorry without sound. You nod. No violation logged. It was, as the manual calls it, a humane lapse. Then, at Table 14 it happens. The reader, an older woman with gray gloves and a notebook full of carefully inked lines, rises from her chair. Slowly, deliberately. She holds her book open with both hands and begins to recite. Aloud. You freeze. The voice is soft, clear, poetic. Something about ravens and the cost of remembering. Every reader turns. No one speaks. No one stops her. She finishes the passage, closes the book, and returns to her seat. You are paralyzed. The whistle trembles in your hand. A senior librarian appears at your side. Do you know what you just witnessed? She asks. You shake your head. A sanctioned reading, she says. Rare. We allow one per decade. You nod, heart-pounding, and write Table 14 recitation. Approved anomaly. Note poise. Note gravity. Note everything. As the room exhales once more, you take your seat behind the central desk. A man approaches with a question. Can one request a book that has forgotten its title? You glance at the manual. There is in fact a procedure. You give him the form Request for Amnesiac Literature, Form B7D. He thanks you and walks away humming. The afternoon fades into amber light. You complete 5 more rotations. One reader has vanished. Another has multiplied. There are now 2 identical readers at Table 6, both reading The Ethics of Reflection. You decide to let it resolve itself. At 600 p.m., the room is closed. The lamps are dimmed. The readers disperse like clouds retreating from an afternoon storm. You stack your notes, return the pencil, and place your whistle gently into the drawer. It hums faintly. You do not ask why. That night you don't write in your notebook immediately. You sit with your tea, staring at the steam, thinking of the woman at Table 14, and the impossible grace of her voice. Eventually you write. Job includes listening for what breaks the rules beautifully. You underline the word beautifully twice. You sleep without dreams, but wake humming a tune you've never heard before. You're assigned to the music alcove today, a space you've passed many times without much notice, tucked between the genealogy wing and the stairwell that leads nowhere in particular. It is not a place of popularity. Few patrons venture into it. Fewer still return with coherent opinions. You're told to report to the instrument desk, which you assume to be a metaphor. It isn't. The desk is exactly what it sounds like, a desk, shaped like an instrument, specifically a harpsichord, though the keys have been replaced with drawers. Above it hangs a faded sign, Sonorous Holdings and Oral Artifacts, staff only beyond this point. A sheet of music is pinned beside it, handwritten and titled, Do not attempt to play this. You make a mental note not to. Your task, as outlined in a slightly wrinkled memo, is to audit the sound collection, a loosely organized archive of musical materials deemed too obscure, inconvenient, or experimental for regular circulation. The collection includes scores, wax cylinders, tuning forks with opinions, and several unreliable metronomes. You are to verify inventory re-sleeve damaged materials and document any unexplained music. Yes, that's what it says. You begin with the wax cylinders. There are hundreds. Each stored in a brown paper sleeve and labeled with a code. Some are straightforward V-Zone rain on tin domestic. Others less so. X031, lullaby for teeth. You place the latter gently aside. Listening is optional. You are advised to do so only if necessary for classification. You are not provided with a player. Instead, you're directed to an alcove chair upholstered in green velvet that vibrates faintly when sat upon. It is said to remember the contents of each recording. You sit. The vibrations are disconcerting, not unlike sitting atop a polite earthquake. You begin with C014, Song for Disgruntled Roof Tiles. The vibration is slow offbeat, strangely comforting. You log it under Environmental Grievance, Rhythmic. Then L045, Duet for one revised. The chair is still. After a moment, your ears ring faintly. You write Silence with Consequences. You move on. After the cylinders come, the scores, manuscripts, hand-copied pages, annotated prints. One is a sonata written entirely in the key of B minor, except for one measure that shifts into an unknown mode labeled almost G. Another is a fugue where each part is meant to be hummed by someone who hasn't slept in 48 hours. You suspect this was tested once. Probably only once. You find a folder of compositions from the library's own patrons. The first is titled Theme for Repeated Regret. The melody is simple, repetitive haunting. Next is Counterpoint in the style of misremembered childhood. You feel that one in your chest. As you continue, the air in the alcove grows heavier. Not oppressive, just denser. Each drawer you open releases a faint chime, as if the notes stored inside are stretching their legs. You start to notice the rhythm of your own movements, steps in 3-2, breathing in syncopation. You wonder if you're being written into something. Midway through the afternoon, you discover the fork drawer. Dozens of tuning forks arranged not by pitch, but by temperament. You test a few. One emits a clear A440. Another produces a tone you feel only in your teeth. The third, when struck, causes the nearby shelf to realign itself by half an inch. You log it as fork, slightly authoritative. Then there's the metronome. Just one. Encased in glass. A plaque beneath it reads, Unreliable, do not trust. You watch it for several minutes. It ticks normally, then slows, then stops, then ticks backwards. You look away. When you look back, the time on your pocket watch has changed by 6 minutes. You decide to log this under chronological interference mild. You take a break on the mezzanine balcony overlooking the alcove. From here, the entire music wing appears to shift subtly, like it's breathing in time with some inaudible melody. Below, a reader plays with the silent piano fingers, dancing across keys that make no sound. You watch. You listen. You begin to hear something not from the piano, but from the ceiling, the walls, the floor. A kind of harmony. You don't write it down. You don't want to disturb it. Back at the harpsichord desk, you organize your notes. A passing clerk offers you tea and a biscuit shaped like a treble clef. You accept because you've learned never to decline food from someone holding sheet music. As you file your report, you notice one final item at the bottom of the inventory. A song never sung. There's no location listed, no date, just the phrase, "It waits." You check the drawers, the files, the shelves. Nothing. Then you look up. A single note has been taped to the underside of the desk. If you find yourself humming something unfamiliar, log it. You haven't been humming. But you've been tapping your fingers. You stop. The rhythm continues without you for just a second longer than it should. You go home in silence. Not the hollow kind, but the full kind. Like the last note of a piece hanging in the air not ready to resolve. That night, you write in your notebook, Job includes listening for what was never played. You underline it once, then cross it out. Then write it again. And as you drift to sleep, you hear a single note. It's not from outside. It's not from a dream. It's from somewhere just behind your ear. You're scheduled today for something called special handling, which sounds deceptively ceremonial, like you might be given gloves and a book that smells like mystery. Instead, you're handed a broom. It's not even a particularly nice broom. The bristles are worn and uneven, the handle patched with what may be a piece of an old bookmark. The staff member handing it to you says, "You'll be sweeping the rotunda." Then adds gently, "You've seen the rotunda before, but only from a distance. It's the central chamber of the oldest part of the library, a circular room domed with stained glass and lined with pillars carved to resemble quills, scrolls, and one unfortunate cherub who appears to be choking on a footnote. The floor is mosaic, thousands of tiny tiles, forming what looks like a compass made from quotation marks. The whole room glows with the filtered light of mid-morning intellect. Your job today is to sweep it, but not just sweep. Preserve. You are told quite firmly that dust in the rotunda is partially historical and must not be entirely disturbed. Your task is to maintain balance, remove excess accumulation while leaving the patina of time intact. You are given a map. It's a chart of acceptable sweeping zones, danger patches not structurally dangerous, aesthetically dangerous, and 2 sacred dust spirals that must never under any circumstance be touched. You begin in the western quadrant near the bust of a librarian named Beatrice Elm. The plaque below her reads, "Catalogued the Wind 1843. You nod politely, then lower your broom. The sweeping must be done in a figure-8 motion, slowly, without pause. You are told this is because the dust has expectations. It is during your second figure-8 that you notice something strange. There's music playing not from a visible source, but somewhere within the room. It's faint, like a tune remembered just as you're falling asleep. A lullaby written for old ceilings. You pause. The music pauses with you. You resume. So does it. You smile just a little. As the hours stretch on, you develop a rhythm. Sweep, step, sweep. You begin to notice things others likely miss. A faint indentation in the floor, the shape of a boot no longer manufactured. A strand of thread caught in the grout between tiles, red and gold, the colors of the lost circulation robes. A coin tarnished beyond recognition, tucked into a crack beneath the east window. You leave it where it is. It belongs to the rotunda now. By midday, you've made your way to the center. The compass mosaic shifts slightly depending on where you stand, sometimes pointing north, sometimes toward the reference wing, once directly at your own feet. You suspect this is intentional. At the very center is a small glass pedestal. On it sits a book. You were told not to touch the book. You were told very specifically to sweep around the pedestal in a clockwise spiral no fewer than 7 passes. You do so. On the 5th pass, the book opens itself. On the 6th, a single page turns. On the 7th, you hear a whisper. It says, "Thank you." You stop sweeping. The broom stills in your hand. You whisper back, "You're welcome," and move on. Later, a tour group passes through. They shuffle quietly, led by a docent who speaks in museum tones. She gestures to the stained glass above. Each pane represents a lost index note, the glass etched with fire. That's the registry of burnt materials lost in 1781. They linger near the southern alcove. One child asks, "Why is that person sweeping?" The docent answers, "Because if no one did, we'd forget we ever had a floor at all." You finish just before dusk. The light through the stained glass has shifted from golden to violet. The shadows have lengthened. You stand at the edge of the room, broom in hand, and glance back. The floor gleams not clean exactly, but awake. The dust has settled in its rightful places. Nothing is pristine. Everything is right. As you return your broom to the storage closet, which smells oddly of toast, you find a folded note on the wall beside the hook. It reads, "Sweeping is remembering without speaking. Thank you for remembering today." No signature. You fold it into your notebook. That night you sit with your tea and reflect. You think about all the people who've walked across that floor, who sat or wept or argued or found peace. You think about dust not as dirt, but as the memory of touch. You write Job includes caring for things not because they're perfect, but because they were once touched by someone who cared. You underline touched. Then close the notebook without adding anything else. Some entries don't need explanations. There's a new seal on your assignment sheet this morning. A circular stamp in waxy purple ink that reads, "Office of Internal Curiosities," encircling a motif of two owls reading opposite pages of the same book. No one seems to know who applied the stamp. The schedule, in fact, wasn't even there when you first arrived. It simply appeared after you set down your cup of tea. You lift the paper, examine it, front and back, and find a single handwritten note. You are to assist with review of anomalous reference requests. Below it in finer script, "Please wear gray." You change. The assigned room is one you've never entered before, tucked between the obsolete periodicals cabinet and the hallway that always smells of lemon and ink. The door is heavy but not locked. Inside, silence and a desk with two chairs. A stack of folders sits neatly on the center blotter, weighted with a polished stone that feels warm when touched. A window too high to see through lets in pale, steady light. There is no clock. Time, you assume, is optional. You sit. The first folder is labeled Request. Pose 37. Any book that might prove my father wrong about clouds. Inside, a single sheet of parchment with the requester's name redacted, and a brief note has previously borrowed volumes on meteorology metaphor and familial disappointment. Suggested response. No such book confirmed, but possible candidate, The Emotional Geography of Weather. File under Probable Reconciliation. You mark it and move on. The next is Stranger. Request, $12.94. A map that shows me where I lost it. No clarification provided. The folder contains 3 notes all written in different handwriting. It might be in the margins. Ask the atlas about dreams. Return if found. You mark the request as unresolved and place the folder in the tray labeled Pending Synchronicity. As the day progresses, the requests pile up in intricacy. Some are practical. A timeline of every mistake I didn't make. Others feel like riddles written during sleep. Is there a volume where the footnotes forgive me? One simply reads, "Please just let me hold something old and kind." You are not authorized to approve or deny. Your job is to observe, assess plausibility, note cross-references. But the more you read, the more you feel like you're peering into the private chapters of people's lives. Chapters never meant to be read, but shelved anyway, somewhere between longing and logic. One request in particular catches you. Request 2020. Do you have a book that remembers me? It's been flagged 4 times. Once with possible match journal of the unkept promises, see drawer 9. Another note suggests check forgotten borrower's register. A third note simply says, sometimes yes. You close the folder gently. At some point, a librarian you've never met enters the room. They wear all gray, even gloves. They do not speak. They remove a single folder from the bottom drawer, nod once to you, and vanish behind the curtains near the back wall. You mark their visit in the log, but no one told you where the logbook was yet. It's already open on the desk. You take a break. In the side alcove is a tiny kitchenette, 1 teacup, 1 spoon, 1 sugar cube. The tea tin is labeled Infusion for Lingering Questions. You make a cup. It tastes like rosemary and hesitation. When you return to the desk, a new request has appeared on the top of the pile. No folder, just a slip of paper. What happened to the book I almost wrote? You pause. There's no reference number, no file, no author. Just the question. You hesitate, then write beneath it. It became part of every sentence you've ever regretted stopping. You place it in a tray of its own, unmarked, unclaimed. The rest of the afternoon drifts. You read through files on volumes misplaced by emotion books, found only during certain moon phases, and a request for a dictionary where love has more than one definition and none are final. You add it to the likely fiction still true stack. At closing time, the window dims, not from nightfall, but from choice. The folders, still on the desk, gently rearrange themselves into a new order. The warm stone now feels cool. You stand. The door opens on its own. No one thanks you. No one needed to. You walk home slowly, aware that you've spent a day handling the paperweight of human need, one request at a time. You feel oddly tender. At home, you write in your notebook, job includes knowing that not all library materials are books. Some are hopes that didn't know where else to go. You stop. Then write another line, I hope someone files me under ongoing. You're assigned today to what the schedule calls the binding department, though everyone else seems to refer to it simply as the stitchery. You expect thread, perhaps some quiet work repairing the frayed edges of old covers, or mending the spine of a book that has seen too many hands. What you do not expect is the sheer reverence that fills the room. The stitchery is located behind 3 locked doors, each heavier than the last, and its entrance is flanked by a pair of chairs no one sits in. You are not sure if this is out of respect or superstition. The walls are covered in framed thread patterns, some diagrammatic, some decorative, all beautiful and slightly unsettling in their precision. The air smells of leather and glue, and something faintly floral like pressed violets, left too long in a closed drawer. You are greeted by a woman in a high-necked blouse who introduces herself simply as Threadmaster. Whether this is her title or her name, no one clarifies. She hands you a smock and a small pair of silver scissors. You will not be cutting anything, she explains. The scissors are symbolic. You nod, as if this makes perfect sense. The first task is observation. You are told to sit and watch as the senior binders work. At first, it seems simple enough. A torn page, a worn cover, a cracked spine. But then you begin to notice the details. Every stitch follows a rhythm. Every fold aligns with a rule that is never spoken aloud. There are colors of thread that are never used together. There are knots that must be tied only in silence. One binder hums while she works, but never the same tune twice. Another uses gloves made from old book cloth, soft and faded with time. Each movement is deliberate, precise, and oddly graceful. You find yourself leaning forward without meaning to drawn in by the hypnotic rhythm of their hands. After an hour, you are given your first assignment. Not a damaged book, but a blank one. The cover is soft, pale brown, unmarked. The pages are thick and ivory, untouched. Your job, Threadmaster says, is to stitch its spine. not to hold it together yet, but to teach it the concept of cohesion. The thread is red. You are given a needle and a pattern drawn on translucent paper. It looks like a musical score made by someone who speaks in commas. You begin slowly, hands shaking slightly. The thread pulls through with a whisper. You wonder if the book can feel it. The hours pass in a kind of focused stillness. You make mistake after mistake. Your stitches are too tight, too uneven, too loud. You start again and again. Eventually, the rhythm finds you. The needle moves on its own. The paper softens under your touch. The pattern begins to make sense not as logic, but as language. You realize at one point that you are holding your breath. You let it go. The book exhales with you. Midway through the day, you are asked to assist with a restoration. The book in question is old, older than anything you've touched before. Its cover is brittle. Its spine has collapsed. Its pages are loose, scattered, some written in ink so faded it barely exists. The title has been lost. Inside, the margins are filled with notes. Not scholarly ones, but personal. Someone once loved this book enough to talk back to it. Your job is to rebind it without erasing that history. You work slowly. You use thread the color of storm clouds. Each stitch is a conversation. Each knot an apology. As you work, you learn the unspoken rules. Never bind in anger. Never tie a knot you cannot untie in your mind. Always finish a thread with gratitude, even if the book does not say thank you. You ask if these rules are written down. Threadmaster shakes her head. Written rules are for those who fear forgetting. We stitch so we remember without paper. You nod, understanding now why no one speaks above a whisper in the stitchery. It is a sacred place not because it demands reverence, but because it has earned it. In the late afternoon, a delivery arrives. A box of books wrapped in linen marked return to form. You help unpack them. Each one has been taken apart and needs to be rebuilt. Some are missing pages. Others have been soaked through with water or ink or what one binder simply calls experience. You watch as the senior binders examine each book not for damage, but for desire. This one wants to be slimmer. This one wants to forget. This one wants to be read again, but only by hands that tremble. They assign each to a different table. You are handed one with no cover and no spine. Just pages loose and worn and soft at the edges like fabric. There is a note pinned to the first page. It reads, "Please be kind. You are." Before you leave for the day, Threadmaster calls you aside. She places a tiny, stitched square in your hand, no larger than a coin. On it is a single symbol, a closed book with a thread running through its center. "It's for your notebook," she says. So it knows what you're learning. You thank her. She nods. "Do not come back tomorrow," she adds. "Let your hands forget what they've learned. Then return." You walk home differently, slower, more aware of the thread in your coat, the seam in your gloves, the invisible binding of your own thoughts. At home, you place the stitched square between the pages of your notebook. Then, on the last line of today's entry, you write Job, includes listening to what falls apart and knowing how to help it hold. You pause. Then, add one stitch at a time. And yes, bookbinding is a centuries-old craft, and in many libraries the repair and maintenance of books is an art as much as a science. Some institutions still maintain hand-stitch binding departments where damaged volumes are restored using traditional techniques. The symbolism of thread, particularly red or gold, appears frequently in book lore, often associated with memory, promise, or restoration. There are documented cases of binders leaving invisible messages sewn into the spine of a book. Initials, dates, tiny symbols known only to the restoration staff. One restorer once confessed to stitching the phrase, "I forgive you," into the binding of a diary found among anonymous donations. And the idea that a book can want something, or that pages remember the hands that held them, that may not be in the manuals, but every true binder will tell you it's true. Or, if not true, at least true enough to respect. And the thread you used today, you'll see it again. In another room, holding something else together. Today begins with rain, not the gentle kind that whispers across windows, but the heavy, unrelenting kind that seems to fall in straight lines. You arrive soaked despite your umbrella, and the moment you step inside the library, the silence swallows the sound of dripping. There's something about this kind of silence. It's not passive, not neutral. It is observant. You shake off your coat, leave it on the peg, and make your way to the assignment board. A slip of parchment smaller than usual awaits you there. It contains a single sentence written in precise cursive report to the Department of Forgotten Instructionals. You pause. You've heard of it in passing. Whispers between clerks. Stories shared during tea breaks. But like most things in the library, what you've heard is likely only half the truth, and the other half is waiting to surprise you. The Department of Forgotten Instructionals is located in the northeast wing past the clock that runs backward and the hallway where echoes arrive before their source. The door is plain. No signs. Just a small brass plate engraved with the word "Remember." You knock out of instinct. The door opens without sound. Inside the room is filled with boxes. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, stacked neatly along the walls and down the center aisle. Each box is labeled with a subject and a date. Topics range from the mundane to the mysterious: how to fold a letter without emotion etiquette for communicating with statues, recipes for unasked questions, the correct posture for apologies, and how to greet a ghost politely. Many of the instructions are decades old. Some are centuries. A few are dated tomorrow. Your task is to review, update, and reclassify any instructionals deemed in danger of permanent irrelevance. You're told this by a librarian named Miriam, who wears gloves not because she's afraid of dust, but because some of the documents bite. She hands you a clipboard, a list of review criteria, and a small bottle of ink labeled "For Clarification Only." You begin. The first box you open contains leaflets titled "How to Exit a Conversation Without Causing Existential Crisis." You skim the text. It begins with polite phrases like, "I must let you go," and gradually progresses to complex gestures involving hats, coughs, and references to fictional appointments. The final page is blank, except for the words, "If they follow you, smile." You mark the instruction as partially relevant and flag it for redrafting. The next box is older. The paper is brittle, the handwriting looping and elegant. The subject preparing tea for someone who hasn't asked but needs it. The instructions are poetic rather than practical. Step 1. Know the silence. Step 2. Choose the cup before the leaves. Step 3. Wait. You read it twice. You mark it as essential. As the day continues, the room grows warmer. The scent of old paper mingles with something floral and faintly nostalgic. The instructionals become more personal. One is titled, "What to Say When You Find Their Book on Someone Else's Shelf." Another reads, "How to Miss Someone Without Admitting It." A third simply says, "For when you realize you were wrong in the middle of an argument from 3 years ago." You stop and breathe. These aren't just instructions. They're reminders. Not of how to do things, but of how to be. How to carry yourself when no one is watching. How to tend to moments that no longer have an audience. You find one pamphlet, handwritten in pencil, unbound, tucked between two printed manuals. It has no title, only a list. Listen before reacting. Ask before naming. Fold the letter, even if you never send it. Leave room for them to come back. Not everything needs to end with a period. You copy the list into your notebook. Not as part of the assignment, just because. After lunch, Miriam shows you the restricted drawer. Inside are instructionals deemed too specific, too unfinished, or too unwilling. One is titled, How to Apologize Without Using the Word Sorry. Another says, How to Walk Away Without Becoming a Villain. You are not allowed to revise these. You are only allowed to read them, and if necessary, listen. Some pages hum softly when touched. Others grow colder. You spend an hour with a booklet titled, What to Do When the Story Forgets You. It is mostly blank. The only legible sentence reads, Keep moving. Someone will remember. You hold it longer than you mean to. When you place it back, the ink on your fingers has vanished. Near the end of the day, you find a folder marked Emergency Instructions Never Used. Inside is a single sheet. In large, careful letters it reads, When you no longer know what to do, begin again by offering tea. It is not assigned to any known category. You create one. You leave the department quietly. Miriam nods to you a silent thank you. She is already sorting new arrivals instructions for beginnings, for endings, and for the liminal spaces between. You walk home through puddles. The rain has slowed, but the air is heavy with the kind of stillness that follows old conversations. You do not open your notebook immediately. Instead, you brew tea. Not for a reason. Not for a guest. Just because. Later, by candlelight, you write Job includes preserving what we forgot how to ask for. Then you underline it. Slowly. Once. And yes, some libraries, particularly archival collections, do. House ephemera pamphlets, guides, etiquette manuals, and unpublished material, reflecting the daily needs and forgotten instructions of a particular culture or time. Items such as how to dress while mourning or the correct way to open a letter in public are real historical documents. Some remain uncatalogued due to their subjective nature, others because no one knows what to do with them. Archivists often refer to such materials as soft instructionals guides that operate not on logic but on feeling context and implied cultural memory. And while they rarely fit neatly into subject headings, they carry a weight of human truth unmatched by more formal documentation. And the guide for what to do when the story forgets you. Sometimes that's all a person needs. A place to begin again. Even if it starts with tea, this morning you find a small envelope on your desk before you've even had your tea. It's cream-colored, sealed, with a library wax stamp that's shaped like a comma rather than a crest. No name. No department assignment. Just your initials on the front in handwriting that looks strangely like your own, only neater. Inside is a card that reads without flourish. One day only, the reading room of unreadable books. Below it, in smaller script, a sentence that makes your stomach tense with curiosity. Do not bring questions. They arrive on their own. You dress carefully. Dark clothes, soft shoes. You choose a notebook, but leave your pen behind, remembering the card's warning. You follow the directions printed on the back down the west corridor, past the false mirror left at the tapestry of the sea monster reading a newspaper. The reading room door is plain wood, old, and warm to the touch, and it opens for you the moment you stop thinking about how it should. Inside, there's no librarian, no desk, no shelves. Just a circular room filled with tables, each holding a single book. The ceiling is domed, painted like a cloudy sky in fading gold and slate blue. Light filters through a round opening at the top, shifting slowly as if the room is turning though you don't feel any movement. You approach the first table. The book there is large, bound in green leather embossed with a pattern that seems to change every time you blink. Its title is written in a language you can't read, with symbols that feel familiar, like something you once dreamed. You open it. The pages are blank, no ink, no marks, just the faintest impression of words that might emerge if you stare long enough. You blink again. A sentence forms clear and quiet. This was the moment you decided not to speak. You inhale, then close the book. The next table holds a thin volume wrapped in cloth. You unwrap it carefully. The cover is rough, unfinished, like bark. Inside, the pages are filled with lines of script, written vertically, then upside down, then sideways. The letters rearrange themselves as you try to follow them, always just out of reach. You stop trying. The letters settle into place and become a memory. Yours. A hallway, a voice, a choice you never quite made. You close the book and step back. At the third table, the book is warm. Not hot, comfortably warm like a lap or the space beside a fireplace. The cover is stitched with what looks like threads of hair or memory or both. There is no title. You open it, and for a moment you hear something. Not a voice, not exactly, but a presence. The page reads, "You were never difficult. You were just trying to understand. You do not cry, but you almost do." You walk the room slowly now, no longer rushing to see what each book contains. The unreadable books are not unreadable because they are written in code or damaged. They are unreadable because they require something more than comprehension. They ask for presence, for stillness, for the willingness to not understand fully and yet sit with what they offer. One book is locked. You do not have the key, but you hold it anyway. It feels heavy with kindness. Another is shaped like a scroll but bound like a diary. It refuses to open until you sit down, breathe, and say nothing. When it opens, it reveals only one line. You were never meant to carry it alone. You stay in the reading room for hours. Time is different here. It doesn't move forward so much as around. You read a book that speaks only in smells, fresh bread rain on warm stone, the air after someone you love has left. You sit with a book that weighs nothing but feels like holding a boulder. Its title is Forgiveness in the Time of Silence. You understand it even though it has no words. Eventually, your hands begin to ache. You've not written anything, not made a single note, but you've read so much. Not through your eyes, but through something quieter. You prepare to leave. As you walk to the door, one final table catches your attention. The book there is small, plain, and open. On the page is a question. What would you write here if you could? You do not pick up the book. You simply answer it in your mind. The page turns itself. When you exit, the door closes behind you without sound. The hallway is as you left it. The air smells like the ordinary library again, paperwood, ink, and dust. But something in you has shifted. Back at your desk, your notebook is open to a blank page. A single line has appeared in your handwriting. Job includes listening to the things that don't use words. You smile faintly. You do not write anything else, And yes, while no formal library contains an official room of unreadable books, the idea is not as fictional as it seems. In many institutions, there are collections of books in lost languages, books without known authors and books whose scripts defy identification. Some are written in codes never broken, others in invented languages used by a single person. Libraries keep them not because they can be read, but because they were meant to be. That, intent archivists say, is reason enough. There are also documented cases of books that evoke strong emotions despite their content being incomprehensible, perhaps because they mirror back something the reader brings to them. This phenomenon is sometimes called reflective reading, and in the rarest cases it's said that certain books will open only when the reader stops expecting them to. And the book that asked you a question, it already knew your answer. It just wanted you to hear it too. You arrive earlier than usual today, long before the other clerks, long before the doors even creak open on their own. The sky is still dim, that pale gray blue that seems to belong more to memory than to morning. The corridors are quiet every step, echoing softly on stone and worn tile. You're not scheduled yet. There's no assignment posted. But waiting on your desk is a plain envelope with your name written in blocky, uneven handwriting. It smells faintly of wax and something like lavender. Inside a note and a small brass key. The note says in careful, almost childlike print, North Annex, 3rd floor behind the wall clock. Use only when you need to. You've never been to the North Annex. Most people haven't. It's technically part of the library, but unofficially it's referred to as the in-between. A storage wing, a non-wing, an architectural shrug of stone and shelves that seem to change positions when no one is looking. It's not forbidden, but few go there without purpose. You hold the key. Today, you have one. You make your way through corridors that narrow as you go, passing through lesser-used halls. Dust here is thicker. The silence has texture. The wall clock stands alone at the far end of a 3rd-floor hallway, its hands frozen at 2:17. You try to move it. It doesn't budge. Then you stop pushing and instead knock once, twice, pause. The wall behind it shifts with a low sigh. The passage is just wide enough to walk sideways. You move slowly, brushing against the stone as you go. Eventually, the path widens into a small chamber lit by skylight. The walls are lined not with books, but with shelves of objects. Personal ones. A glove, a wooden spoon, a child's shoe, a folded letter, a single earring. Each sits inside a shallow drawer marked only by a number. On the far wall is a metal cabinet. You use the key. Inside is a single file, thick and yellowed with age. It's labeled, Readers Who Were Never Finished. You sit on the nearby bench, which has been softened by time and quiet, and open the file. Each entry is a story. Not of characters, but of people. Real people. Borrowers who once checked out a book, then disappeared, or changed, or stopped reading altogether. The file doesn't judge. It records. One note says, borrowed a book on bravery, returned it half-read, then moved out of town. Another reads, asked for a guide to starting over. Never came back, but sent flowers to the catalog desk every spring. Some entries are just feelings. Looked tired. Needed something gentle. Asked for hope. Settled for poetry. Left with silence. You realize these are not records meant to track or reclaim. They are records of care. Someone somewhere wanted to remember who needed what. Not every book gets finished. Not every reader stays. But someone wrote it down anyway. You keep reading. the entries become more fragmented. One card says stopped reading when the room got too quiet. Another started over every time the main character did. Still stuck on page 11. Another simply held the book close like it might speak first. There's an empty space in the file. A card is missing. You glance around, unsure if this is a mistake. But then you feel something in your coat pocket. You reach in and find a blank card the same size as the others. You didn't put it there. But somehow you know what to do. You take the pencil tucked behind your ear, a habit you didn't know you'd picked up, and write borrowed nothing. Sat quietly in the reference wing. Wanted to feel a page breathe. Stayed longer than planned. Promised to come back. You place the card into the file. It fits perfectly as if it had always been missing. Before you leave, you take one last look at the shelf of objects. The glove twitches just slightly. The spoon hums soft and content. The letter unfolds an inch as though exhaling. This room isn't haunted, it's holding, waiting, remembering what someone else might forget. You exit the annex slowly. The passage closes behind you. When you reach the main corridor again, the library feels different. Not changed exactly, but clearer. Like someone wiped the fog from a pane of glass you didn't know was there. Back at your desk, the envelope is gone. But your tea is still warm, and your notebook is open to a fresh page. You write Job includes remembering the ones who never reached the ending. And yes, archivists often maintain collections of ephemera unclaimed letters, lost bookmarks, personal effects, tucked into returned books. Some libraries catalog these quietly under terms like anonymous deposits or reader remnants. In a few special cases, entire rooms are devoted to the preservation of human traces in literature. These collections are rarely public, but always tended. It is said that every unfinished book leaves behind a trace. Not guilt, not failure, just a quiet place where someone once paused. And in those pauses, sometimes the library writes back. You are not given a room assignment today. Instead, a clerk hands you a small envelope just as you arrive, and you can tell immediately that something is different. The paper is thicker than usual, textured, like pressed linen, and the wax seal is unmarked. No department name. No return instruction. Only your name written not in ink, but in raised thread stitched directly into the paper. You unseal it slowly. Inside is a slip of paper that reads, "The catalog of impossible books has reopened. A guide will meet you at the eastern stairwell. You've heard of it. Everyone has. Not in official documents, of course, but whispered between shifts in the quiet pauses during tea or late at night while shelving in the deeper stacks." The catalog was closed for years, supposedly, because one of the books refused to remain indexed. Others say the door disappeared. Some believe it was never real at all. But today it is open, and your name is on the slip. You head for the eastern stairwell, heart doing a strange rhythm under your ribs. At the landing between the second and third floors, a woman waits. She does not introduce herself, but simply nods. Her coat is the color of old parchment, and the cuffs are embroidered with fine looping patterns that resemble both letters and vines. Without a word, she turns and leads you up a narrow staircase you've never seen before, though you've walked this corridor dozens of times. The stairs curve, and the walls are lined with tiny windows, none larger than your hand, through which you catch glimpses of stars, clouds, waves, and once a room filled with clocks that have no faces. At the top, a door. Wooden, tall, slightly crooked. The brass knob is warm to the touch as if recently held. When you step through, the air shifts. It smells like ink and thunder and the breath before a confession. The room is vast. Endless shelves stretch in every direction, but unlike other parts of the library, they are not arranged by author title or even language. Instead, each section is marked by a question. You pass shelves labeled, "What could have happened?" What they meant to say. What was almost true and what never asked for a reader. Each holds books with titles that blur as you look at them. Letters reshaping themselves according to mood or memory. Your guide speaks for the first time. She says, "Here books are written when no one is looking." She gestures toward a shelf labeled, "What you tried not to want," and then vanishes without sound. You are left alone, surrounded by shelves filled with the echo of thought and the ghost of longing. You approach the nearest row. A thin volume with a silver spine hums softly as you pick it up. The title shifts beneath your fingers. It begins as "How to Stop Wishing for a Different Ending," then flickers to the story I was afraid to begin. You open it. Inside are no words, only faint impressions of voices you think you once heard. Laughter in the wrong place. Silence that felt like permission. You close the book gently. At another shelf you find a heavy tome titled "The Letter You Never Sent." Inside is a single sentence written over and over again in different hands. I didn't know how to say it, but I meant it. The pages are soft from being turned, though no one remembers doing so. Further on, you encounter a shelf that hums like a hive. Its label reads, "What the library thinks of you." You hesitate, then choose a book at random. Its cover is mirror-like, and as you hold it, you feel warmth. You open it. The pages glow faintly. Each one says something small, gentle. "Thank you for noticing." You ask good questions. You read with your whole heart. You feel your eyes sting, and you close the book quickly. Deeper still, the catalog grows stranger. Some books are weightless. Others are warm to the touch. One is made entirely of thread. Another is just a bottle with a cork, no pages. But when you open it, you hear a voice say softly, "You did your best." A bookshelf nearby holds only one book, immense and glowing. The title reads, "If They Had Stayed." You do not open it. Instead, you rest your hand on the cover and whisper, "I understand." The book becomes quiet, as if it heard and was grateful. Hours pass, or none do. In the catalog, time folds differently. You find a shelf marked "What You've Forgotten on Purpose." You hesitate longer this time. You open a small violet book. Inside is a room, a hallway, a voice, a goodbye you told yourself never happened. You close it and place it back with shaking hands. Eventually, you find the central table. On it rests a book that is unmistakably yours. It has no label, no shelf. Its cover is the same shade as your favorite coat. The first page reads, "This book writes itself as you go." You glance down. The second page says, "You are here now. You are listening. You are ready." You do not read further. Some stories are best experienced one page at a time. When you finally return to the door, your guide is there. She smiles, not kindly, not knowingly, but gently. She nods once. You pass through. Back in the stairwell, the air feels heavier. Not in a burdensome way, but full. Like something unfinished has taken a breath. You walk back slowly. When you return to your desk, there is no envelope. But your chair feels warmer, as though someone had just stood up from it. Your tea is fresh. Your notebook is open. And a new line has appeared on the page, Job includes making space for the books that do not yet exist. And yes, libraries, especially rare book rooms and archival collections, sometimes catalog what they call phantom records. These are entries for books that were once planned, rumored, or miscatalogued. Some are errors. Others are echoes. In one case, an entire shelf was devoted to titles that patrons swore they had borrowed, but which the library had no record of ever owning. Cataloging systems around the world have made room for things that don't quite fit. Special categories like ephemeral anomalous or speculative have been created for works that resist standard classification. One library in the Netherlands has an index labeled Unverified Truths. Another in Kyoto includes a shelf marked Stories with no author yet, and the catalog of impossible books. It is real, if not by logic, then by need. You are summoned today by a small bell. It rings only once somewhere deep within the western corridor, and yet you hear it clearly from across the entire building. You pause mid-sentence at your desk, unsure if anyone else noticed, but when you glance around, every clerk continues with their work as if nothing happened. Only you have stopped. Only you seem to have heard it. Beneath your notebook lies a folded sheet of paper that was not there a moment ago. It bears no name, no seal, no greeting, just a single line. The room of first sentences is open. You are expected. You have never been to such a room. You did not know it existed. And yet, the moment you read the words, you know exactly where to go. You travel west, past the dusty case of unshelved manuscripts beyond the quiet hallway, where sound always seems a second too late. You descend one level where the air smells like burnt sugar and old ink. And at the very end of a narrow corridor, a door waits. It is not marked. It does not need to be. The wood is pale, the kind that has not decided whether it belongs to a tree or to a desk. The handle is cool. When you push the door, swings open without resistance. Inside is a long, narrow room lit entirely by golden afternoon light, filtering through high windows. No lamps, no candles. Just that timeless glow that libraries seem to borrow from forgotten seasons. Along the walls are desks, hundreds of them. At each desk, a single sheet of paper, a single pen, and nothing else. The air hums with quiet attention. You walk to the nearest desk. On the paper is a sentence. Only one. Written in a neat, slanted hand. I didn't mean to begin here, but I had no choice. You read it once, then again. Then you move to the next desk. A different sentence. She waited for the storm, not because she feared it, but because she needed something to answer back. You feel something stir in your chest. Every sheet in this room holds a first sentence. Nothing more. No paragraphs, no pages, no endings, only beginnings. Each written by someone, maybe a patron, maybe a librarian, maybe someone who never even stepped foot inside the building, but still found their way to this place in spirit. A library of intentions. You walk slowly, reading as you go. Some sentences are bold declarative. Others are tentative questioning. One simply says, "I thought I was alone." Another reads, "This was the first time I lied and meant it kindly." Some are silly. Some are aching. Some are just names. A few are crossed out and rewritten. A few are smudged as if the writer could not bear to finish even that much. Midway down the room, you find a desk with a blank page. The pen rests beside it. No sentence yet. It waits. You sit without thinking. You reach for the pen, then pause. What would your first sentence be if it had to stand alone? What truth would you begin with if you didn't have to explain yourself after you take a breath? Then you write, "I wanted to be kind, but I was afraid they'd forget me if I was quiet." The ink dries quickly. The paper does not resist. You leave it there and move on. As you reach the far end of the room, the windows darken slightly, as if the day itself is exhaling. You find a small alcove hidden behind a curtain of hanging parchment. In this corner, the first sentences are older, faded, some written in languages you don't recognize, some scratched into bark or stitched into fabric. These sentences carry weight. You feel it in your ribs. One of them says, "I remember everything they told me to forget." Another, "I waited long enough. This is mine now." You touch a page at random. It feels warm, as though someone just lifted their hand from it. You read the sentence. You cannot recall it a moment later, but something in you softens. Before you leave, you glance back across the rows of desks. None of the sentences repeat. None contradict. All of them hold a certain bravery. To begin something without knowing how it ends. To write even one line and believe it deserves space. You exit through a second door that leads directly back into the central corridor. The transition is seamless, and yet when you pass through you feel as though you've been elsewhere for hours, maybe days. You reach your desk. Your tea is still warm. Your notebook is open to a blank page. You do not write your sentence again. You already left it where it belongs. Instead, you jot down a thought Job includes making room for beginnings, even the ones that never become anything more. And yes, many real-world libraries and archives keep notebooks or boxes labeled fragments. These include story starters, half-written poems, unsubmitted manuscripts, and stray opening lines found tucked into returned books or scribbled in margins. Some institutions have collected these as part of creative literacy programs, encouraging visitors to leave a sentence behind with no obligation to finish. The act of beginning, they say, is an offering in itself. Writers often say the first sentence is the hardest. Not because it must be perfect, but because it must exist. After that, everything else becomes possible, and the sentence you left behind. It is now part of the room, waiting for someone else to begin where you paused. Today, your assignment comes not in an envelope or a folded note, but in a whisper. It happens while you're shelving a volume on obscure 18th century maritime superstitions. A breeze despite the absence of windows. A hush that draws your attention like a thread pulling at the hem of your thoughts. You turn instinctively, and there it is, scrawled in pencil on the wall between two shelves. Barely visible. Almost shy. 3 words the room remembers. No directions, no signature. But again, you somehow know where to go. You make your way toward the oldest part of the library, where the bricks are darker and the corners hold the scent of storms long past. This section is rarely used, not for lack of relevance, but because it remembers too much. The histories stored here are difficult to carry, heavy with consequence, and not just about events or dates, but about choices, regrets, silence. You find the door. It's small arched, made of a darker wood than anything else nearby. A brass plate, tarnished and crooked, reads only Archive of Unspoken Returns. You open it. The room is small, dusty, lit by one hanging lamp and a window so high you can't tell whether the light through it is sunlight or something else entirely. It doesn't feel like daylight. It feels older. Lining the walls are drawers, hundreds of them. Tiny ones like a card catalog, except none of them have labels. You approach the nearest and pull it open. Inside is a single item, a bookmark made of cloth frayed at the edges with the faint scent of lavender. Attached is a note left in a book on grief. Never claimed. Still carries warmth. You open another, a folded scrap of paper. On it, I only opened the book because they once mentioned it in passing. I wanted to understand. I never finished. That's okay. Drawer after drawer holds artifacts not of fiction but of people. Their moments with books, their pauses, their hesitations. One drawer holds a torn jacket sleeve and a card that reads, "Carried this in every library visit." Never found the right paragraph. Still searching. You realize this is not just a room of objects. It's a room of memory. Not the grand, sweeping kind of memory found in history books or epics, but the small, trembling kind. The kind you leave behind without meaning to. The kind that lingers anyway. You move slowly now, carefully, as if you might disturb the hush that holds these moments in place. A drawer contains a pressed flower, brittle and gold. Another, a bus ticket folded into the shape of a heart. Another, a page torn from a novel with a single line underlined. She left the window open just in case. You do not know these people, and yet you do. In the corner of the room stands a desk. On it, a ledger. Handwritten entries fill the pages, each one a record of something returned not to the shelf, but to the room itself. Some items have dates, others do not. One entry simply says, "Returned hope," slightly crumpled, still mostly intact. Another, "Returned belief in endings." Needed it more than I realized. You scan the names. There are none. No identifications. No borrower numbers. Only what was left. And maybe what was forgiven. You take a breath. You open a drawer at random. Inside is a stone, smooth, palm-sized. No card, no explanation. But as you hold it, you remember a moment from years ago. Sitting alone. Reading a book that made you cry without understanding why. The feeling of being seen when no one was looking. You place the stone back gently. On your way out, you notice one final drawer. It's slightly ajar. Inside is an envelope addressed to you today. Your hands are steady. You open it. The note inside is written in your own handwriting, but you do not remember writing it. It reads, "You made it further than you thought you could." And even on the days you felt lost, the books still knew your name. You fold it. You do not take it. The room does not need more silence. It needs safekeeping. Back at your desk, the shelves around you seem less like storage and more like company. Your tea is cool, but it still tastes sweet. You open your notebook and write, "Job includes remembering what others forget to keep." And yes, some libraries do house lost and found collections that span decades. Items left in returned books are often tucked away in boxes and drawers, forgotten. Bookmarks, photos, handwritten notes. Librarians catalog them quietly, sometimes placing them on display, not to mock forgetfulness, but to honor presence. Because even when we let go, part of us remains in the things we touch. Archivists sometimes call these emotional residues. Evidence not of what we meant to leave behind, but of what mattered when we weren't paying attention. And the bookmark with lavender, the flower that once held sunlight. They waited, not to be returned, but to be remembered. You are walking toward the stairwell when you notice a change in the corridor's scent. It is subtle at first, a faint trace of beeswax and rain, but Then it deepens into something unmistakably floral, like pages pressed between flower petals for years. You pause. The hallway ahead is dim quiet in a way that muffles even your breath. You were not planning to go this way, but something draws you forward. As you walk, the light grows softer, more golden. It pools on the stone floor like warm tea. You pass a window that wasn't there yesterday, through which you can see the top of a tree you cannot identify. Its leaves are silver. The hallway ends in a door you have never seen before. A plaque beside it reads, Garden of Marginalia. You reach for the handle without hesitation. The room is not a room. It is a garden. Indoors, yet alive. Vines curl along the walls. Moss creeps between floor tiles. Sunlight, though you are several stories underground, filters through high panes of stained glass. The air is damp, fragrant with ink and earth and rosemary. Birds flit through the rafters, quiet ones as if trained by librarians. The garden is structured around books. Not placed on shelves, but growing out of the soil, sprouting like plants. A cluster of hardcovers leans out from a tree stump. A novella unfurls like a fern. Tiny paperbacks bloom in rows like cabbage. Every single page has been written in the margins. Every leaf, every petal, every piece of bark. There are no full texts here, only notes, scribbles, reactions, additions, the voices of readers echoing long after the covers closed. You kneel beside a vine-wrapped journal. Its leaves are dense with writing. Some entries are in pencil, others in crayon ink chalk. Many contradict. One line reads, I loved her fiercely. Another on the same stem. This love felt cruel. You run your fingers along the bark of a nearby tree. Carved into it is a sentence the real ending was in Chapter 5. The rest was just aftermath. You move deeper. A bush of forgotten footnotes hums softly as you pass. A stone bench waits beneath an arch of annotated poetry. You sit. On the bench, engraved lightly, is a confession I only wrote in the margins, because I was too afraid to start on a fresh page. You begin to read more closely. One page contains a debate between two readers, each entry dated a year apart. The first, he deserved better. The second, you missed the point. Another margin contains only a name and a question mark. Another, a phone number with no area code. This garden is not about the books themselves. It is about how we read them, how we argue with them, fall in love with them, misunderstand them, rewrite them in the quiet corners of our minds. It is a library of response, a place where interpretation is not final, but alive. A tree catches your attention. Its trunk is smooth, its leaves shaped like exclamation points. Instead of bark, it bears scrawled words in dozens of languages. You find a branch within reach. The message nearest your hand reads, I underlined this for you even though you'll never know. You trace the line. The bark is warm. The words remain. In the center of the garden is a pool. Not of water, but of open pages, layered and sealed together to form a surface like glass. Reflections shimmer across them. Faces, places, scenes. You kneel beside it. A sentence ripples across the surface. You are not wrong to read it differently. You remember suddenly a book you once read in your childhood. You cannot recall the plot. Only how one sentence made you feel less lonely. You never wrote in it, but you wanted to. Perhaps you did. Perhaps the garden remembers. You rise. The path forward is now overgrown with vines made from book spines. They part gently as you pass. At the exit is a shelf unlike any other. It holds blank books, each one labeled with a single reader's name. Most are open. Some are full. Others hold only a few scribbled thoughts. You find yours. The cover is soft. The pages inside are fragile, layered with tentative notes. One reads, "I wanted to believe in her." Another, "This reminded me of someone I lost." Another is just a question. What if the villain was right? You realize now that this book was never for anyone else. It exists only because you have read, because you have felt questioned, doubted. The margins you never wrote still left a trace. You leave the book open. You place it back. On your way out, the air smells again of beeswax and rain. You do not look back, but you know the vines are already shifting, growing toward new annotations. Back at your desk, the world feels louder. Not worse, just sharper. You write in your notebook, job includes listening to the margins, even when the page seems silent. And yes, marginalia, the act of writing in the margins of books, is a long-cherished, often contested practice. Some scholars adore it, treating annotations as vital conversations between readers and text. Others consider it sacrilege. In medieval manuscripts, monks often added commentary in the borders known as glosses. In rare cases, readers' notes have become more famous than the text itself. Libraries occasionally preserve heavily annotated books for study, treating the margins as windows into reader psychology, social context, or even secret codes. One such book in a European archive contains only marginalia, its original text carefully erased, overwritten by decades of handwritten arguments about philosophy, dreams, and what counts as a true story. And in this garden of marginalia, you do not need to write everything. Only enough to say, "I was here." This morning you're assigned to the interruption wing. Not officially, of course. Its real name is the Hall of Incomplete Narratives, but no one calls it that. Among the librarians, it's known simply as the wing where stories stop. You've passed its entrance dozens of times without noticing. It blends into the architecture like an apology, low ceilings, dim lights, shelving arranged in abrupt dead ends. Most avoid it unless required. But today, it's yours. The moment you step inside, something shifts. The air is cooler scented faintly with iron and unfinished thoughts. The walls seem to lean in slightly. Every shelf holds books that end too soon. Some halt mid-sentence, others mid-word. Many stop without warning, as if the writer was interrupted or changed their mind or disappeared entirely. Your task, as stated on the note, is to assess and index the degree of incompleteness. You're handed a pencil, a clipboard, and a guidebook with 4 vague categories: paused, abandoned, forgotten, unknown. You do not ask what qualifies as the difference between them. You suspect the library doesn't know either. You begin at shelf 1. The first book you pull is thick, ornate, heavy with promise. The title, The History of All Things Left Unsaid. You open to the last page. It ends with a comma. You flip through. Every chapter is meticulously written. Notes in the margins. Careful pacing. Then, abruptly, nothing. You classify it as paused. It feels like something waiting. The next book is thinner, worn. Its pages are brittle, its title faded. Inside, the text is erratic. Some pages are overwritten, others are blank. The last paragraph ends with "I thought if I just," and then a smear of ink. You consider the feeling it gives you, the weight behind the silence. You mark it as abandoned. Further down the row, you find a children's book. Cheerful cover, bright illustrations, but it ends on page 11 with the line, "The door creaked open and that's it. No art, no conclusion, no monsters, no safety, just the possibility of either." You mark it as unknown. You continue, row by row, volume by volume. You discover a book that consists entirely of prologues, another that contains only footnotes with no main text. One is nothing but a table of contents, elaborate, detailed, promising chapters that never appear. It's titled, "To Be Written." Midway through the shift, you find a book written in delicate handwriting on handmade paper. Its spine is cracked, its cover soft from use. The title reads, "The Letter I Never Sent." Inside are pages of tender recollections, each more intimate than the last. It ends with, "I'm telling you this now," because, and then a blank space like someone ran out of courage. You do not classify this one. You place it gently aside. As you work, the silence grows deeper. Not oppressive, more like the silence of someone holding their breath. The air around these books holds memory, regret, the ache of interruption. And yet not all feel tragic. Some feel like invitations, like an open hand waiting to be taken. You start to see that these books are not failures. They are beginnings that refused to obey structure, stories that stepped off the path. In the far corner, you find a shelf with no index. Its books have no titles, only symbols on the spine, stars, dots, waves, fingerprints. You open one. Every page is a question, not rhetorical ones, real sharp breathing questions. Who forgave first? Where does a dream go when you forget it? What happens to the character you skipped over? You do not index these either. You sit for a moment, letting the questions move through you. On your way back toward the exit, you find a return cart. On it, a single book, newer than the others. Its cover is plain. No title. You open to the first page and read, "This is where I stopped pretending I didn't care." The rest of the book is blank. You add it to your clipboard. Category paused. Subnote tenderly. Before you leave, you look around one last time. The wing does not feel sad. It feels honest. It holds every moment when someone tried, then stopped. Not every story must end. Some simply shift into memory. You return to your desk. The pencil in your hand has dulled to a soft nub. You sharpen it slowly, methodically. Your tea is cool, but not bitter. Your notebook is open to a new page. You write, "Job includes listening to the silence after the sentence ends." And yes, literary archives do contain thousands of unfinished works, manuscripts, drafts, story fragments. Sometimes the author passed away. Sometimes they changed direction. Sometimes the story itself refused to cooperate. Scholars study these pieces not only for their content, but for what they reveal about process. Hesitation, evolution, fear, hope. In one university archive, an entire exhibit is dedicated to abandoned projects. Visitors are encouraged to leave their own fragments, a single line, a broken poem, an idea too beautiful to be boxed in. The act of sharing it turns out is often more complete than the act of finishing. And the story that ends mid-sentence may still be waiting. Not for a writer, but for a reader. Today begins not with a summons or a whisper or an envelope, but with a knock. Not on a door, on your desk. 3 soft taps. You look up and see a young clerk you've never met. She wears gloves the color of parchment and a badge that reads, "Department of Misplaced Characters." Without a word, she hands you a list. It is short. 4 names. Beside each, a location in the library. and one final note at the bottom. Please assist in reshelving. They're tired of waiting. You've heard of this department, though it's more folklore than formal practice. Supposedly, it handles the characters who fall out of books. The ones written, then revised away. The sidekicks cut from the final draft. The unnamed villagers who never got a line. The ideas that briefly took form before being replaced by plot. No one knows where they go. But the rumor is they drift through paragraphs, through margins, through books not their own, until someone notices. Your first stop is the natural history section tucked deep within the east stacks. You find a man sitting cross-legged on top of a shelf labeled Mammals BD. He's wearing a green vest and holding a magnifying glass. You ask if he's the one from the list. He nods once. When he speaks, it's quiet. I was supposed to be the third best friend of a boy who trained falcons, but they made the boy solitary in the rewrite. Said it was more poetic. I stayed here. I like birds. You ask if he's ready to go. He says yes. You guide him gently down and mark his name off the list. Next, you head to the cookery archives. Among the recipes and culinary memoirs, you find a woman sitting on a rolling ladder. She's eating an invisible meal with perfect posture. Her name is second on the list. When you greet her, she smiles with faint amusement. I was meant to be the aunt who always knew when someone was lying. I had good lines, but they wanted more mystery. They erased me, then gave my lines to a stranger in a dream sequence. She shrugs. I stayed near the cookbooks because I was always supposed to feed people. You ask if she'd like to come with you. She thinks for a moment, then nods. She tucks her invisible napkin into a pocket and descends with grace. Third on the list is Harder. The name is unfamiliar, just a single word, like a nickname. You search the poetry wing for nearly an hour before finding a small figure curled in the corner of a sonnet anthology. They are young, genderless, dressed in what looks like shadow stitched into fabric. When you whisper their name, they look up with wide eyes. I was a feeling once they say, almost a character. The author called me Tremble. I showed up twice, once behind a door, once in a kiss. Then I was gone. You extend your hand. Tremble takes it with fingers like fog. You do not write anything on your clipboard for them. Some names are better carried than recorded. The last entry simply reads, page 46. You frown. No name, no location, just the number. It takes you another hour to find the book. It's a paperback, slightly worn, tucked into a shelf on urban geography. You flip to page 46. Halfway down the page is a single sentence that feels off, not grammatically, emotionally. The sentence reads, She glanced at the window, and for a moment someone else blinked. You stare, then read it again, and again. Then you see it. Between the lines, the outline of a man. Not described, not named, but there, present, watching. Someone who was meant to be forgotten. You whisper, you're on the list. Would you like to come out? The figure steps free from the page with a sigh like paper being folded. He nods. I was a mistake, but a kind one. You lead all four back through the quiet corridors. No one else notices. Characters are like that. They know how to move between shelves without being seen. At the reshelving room, a quiet chamber with soft chairs and notebooks waiting to be filled, you guide each one to their own space. The man in the green vest is given a window seat with bird feeders. The aunt is given a desk and a full pantry. Tremble finds a hammock made of punctuation. The watcher, from page 46, simply disappears into a mirror. You return to your desk list complete. You write in your notebook, Job includes giving shelter to the almost written. And yes, in real literary practice, many characters never make it into final drafts. Editors, authors, and screenwriters trim entire arcs, personalities, and subplots to maintain focus or pace. But sometimes those characters linger in notes in reader memory, in the atmosphere of stories that feel full of unnamed presences. There are entire fan communities devoted to theorizing about background characters. Readers name them, imagine lives for them, write stories that grant them agency. In some libraries, especially in speculative fiction collections, annotated editions reveal glimpses of what could have been. A line crossed out. A name whispered. Once, then erased. And maybe, just maybe, those forgotten characters still wait. Not for a sequel, but for someone to notice. The day begins with fog thick and reluctant to lift. It presses against the windows like a child wanting back inside. You arrive earlier than usual, drawn by a quiet urgency you can't explain. As you walk the central aisle, your footsteps make no sound. It's as if the library has muffled itself in anticipation. Something is about to surface. You find a new door today, which is not unusual. Doors appear and vanish in this place like metaphors, sometimes clear, sometimes meant only for those who need them. This one is shaped like a keyhole. Narrow, arched, and set with a handle so small you have to turn it with just 2 fingers. Above the door is an inscription that reads, Office of Misfiled Futures. You enter. The room is larger than it should be. It hums with quiet possibility. The shelves are circular, spiraling inward like the grooves of a shell. Each shelf contains books that never existed in this timeline. You recognize the names of authors who never lived long enough to finish their ideas. You see familiar titles with unfamiliar endings. There's a copy of a classic novel that concludes with the villain's redemption. A best-selling memoir written by someone who never left the town they planned to escape. A children's book series that ended on Volume 2 in your world, but here it has the 12, and the final cover shows a grown-up hero with wrinkles and a bakery. You understand now this is where the alternate versions go. Not just drafts, but fully realized works that never had a chance to be born. Some are bright with joy, others heavy with sorrow. Many are simply strange. A sign above the desk reads, Reference Librarian on break since 1874. Below, it is a logbook. You flip through. It's filled with names of visitors who never arrived. Each entry ends with a note like, changed their mind, decided to be an accountant instead, or too afraid to write it down. You find your own name near the end. The note beside it simply says, still circling the idea. You wander the shelves. One book catches your eye. It's titled, The Year I Didn't Leave. You open it. It tells the story of someone who stayed behind, who did not move away, who missed the opportunity everyone said was essential. Instead, they made tea, fed stray cats, learned the names of trees. They were not famous, not even particularly fulfilled, but their quiet life vibrates with attention. Each page is a meditation on stillness. You close the book gently. Another volume. The speech I gave after I was fired. The first pages are shaky, unsure, but by the middle the narrator grows into something luminous. It ends not with applause, but with someone in the audience raising their hand and saying, Me too. You exhale. Further along you find an atlas. It maps places that never existed, cities built on kindness deserts made of memory oceans that remember every shipwreck. One island is labeled the career that would have broken you. Another is called the letter you didn't send but should have. You sit on the floor for a long time just tracing the coastlines. There's a small section tucked beneath the stairs books written by people who never learned to write. They're stories told in gesture, in gaze, in song. Somehow you can still read them. The pages warm under your hands. The words arrive slowly, as if being remembered by the page itself. Then, on a low shelf, you find a book with your initials. Not your full name, just the letters. It's bound in soft gray leather. You hesitate, then open it. The title page reads, "The version of you that wrote every day." The first chapter is clumsy, the second less so. By the fifth, you are writing things you didn't know you felt. The 10th is just a list of all the stories you were afraid to tell. You read 3 chapters before you have to stop. It isn't sadness that moves you. It's recognition. You place the book back. Before you leave, you approach the desk and write one sentence in the visitor log: "I wasn't ready, but I came anyway." As you step into the hall, the fog outside has begun to lift. Light filters through like memory returning. You walk to your usual desk place, your hands flat on its surface, and let the silence settle. Then you write in your notebook, "Job includes honoring the futures that almost happened." And yes, writers often speak of the works they didn't complete. The versions that were shelved, repurposed, or simply forgotten. These unwritten paths are still part of the creative ecosystem. In some rare archival collections, you can find fragments labeled projects of possibility, drafts with potential futures, false starts that reveal truer hearts. They are not waste. They are witness. And sometimes the story you never wrote still writes something in you. You're halfway through alphabetizing a batch of monographs on 19th century candle tax legislation riveting stuff when a drawer beneath your desk opens on its own. Not with a creak or a slam, but with the quiet confidence of something long overdue. Inside, instead of pens or paper clips, sits a brass key. It has no tag, just a long shaft ornately engraved ending in a handle shaped like a question mark. You've never seen this drawer open before, and you've worked at this desk for months, maybe longer. Time in the Victorian Library isn't exactly reliable, but you know what it means. Keys here aren't found. They're issued by the building, by the shelves, by whatever hidden logic the library obeys. You take the key and follow your instincts. Through the ledger room, past the hallway of fictional cartographies, down a corridor where the walls narrow just enough to make you aware of your own breath. At the end is a small square door barely large enough for you to crouch through. Above it, in faded paint, is the word Index. The index room isn't what you expect. It's not a catalog or a filing cabinet. It's a cavern. Tall, echoing, impossibly vast. You step inside and the light adjusts itself gently around you. What you see takes a moment to process. The room is filled with drawers, floor to ceiling. Thousands, tens of thousands. Each one labeled not with titles, but with feelings. Hope misplaced, regret misfiled, joy unexpected, anger redirected, nostalgia falsified. Each drawer is a different emotion paired with a specific verb because nothing in this room is still. This is where the library tracks not what the books are, but what they do to people. What they stir, what they reshape, what they leave behind. You approach a drawer labeled Guilt Carried Too Long. Inside, you find a stack of bookmarks, each scribbled with the name of a book and a page number. On the back of every bookmark is a sentence someone reread so many times the paper began to curl. One simply reads, "I wish I'd said something." Another drawer, "Wonder rekindled." Inside are feather stubs of colored pencils, ticket stubs from museums and botanical gardens. Someone once left a tiny glass jar filled with glitter and the note. This reminded me of Chapter 7. I cried. Good tears. You reach for a drawer labeled "Comfort Repeated." It is heavier than the rest. Inside are well-loved editions of the same book, dog-eared, watermarked, cracked spines. One has been read so often the title has worn off completely. You open it. The margin reads, "I read this every time I forget who I am." In the center of the room is a massive circular desk. Upon it sits a single book titled Index of Indexes. You open to the first page. It reads, "This catalog tracks the echoes, not the origins. Each entry a trace, each drawer a footprint. You may consult, but not correct. Feelings are not errors. You sit. Not because you are tired, but because you need to feel the weight of this place. The silence is comforting, not empty, but full. The kind of silence you get when everyone is listening at once. You look around and wonder how many readers know that their reactions are kept here. Not judged, just preserved. As proof that the story reached someone. You open one last drawer. Grief quietly held. Inside are tissues, not used but folded. Letters written and never sent. A stone from a grave with no name. A pressed flower labeled from the funeral scene peaked you to under 13. You close the drawer gently, almost reverently. On your way out, the key melts in your hand like wax, leaving no mark. The drawer under your desk closes on its own. You return to your routine. You sort the candle tax books. You file them properly. But every now and then you glance at the drawer wondering if it will open again. It doesn't. Not today. In your notebook, you write Job includes tracking the emotional weather of invisible readers. And yes, literary institutions especially, those that house personal collections, often keep annotations, margin notes, and reader correspondence. Scholars study these for insight into reader response, cultural reception, and emotional resonance. It's called reception theory, the study of how texts are understood over time. One person's highlighted sentence might be another's turning point. In some rare collections, entire exhibitions have been devoted to reading traces. Smudges, doodles, notes to self. These artifacts are reminders that reading isn't passive. It's a dialogue, a relationship. A place where someone once said, "This changed me." And sometimes the index isn't about what was written, but about what it left behind. Today, the library smells like coal smoke and wet wool. It's raining again, though no one comments on the fact that the windows are dry. That's just how things are here. Some weather is emotional, not meteorological. You arrive at your usual desk only to find a note that reads Basement Level 4. Bring a candle. There's no signature. There never is. You retrieve a small beeswax candle from the drawer labeled Emergency Ambiance. You light it with a match that strikes too easily, like it's been waiting. The flame burns low, golden, slightly unsure of itself. You carry it through the silent stairwells past the stacks that whisper past the corridor where sound never echoes. Finally, you reach a door marked Department of Forgotten Formats. The room is a time capsule. Every inch is stacked with books that never conformed. Accordion-folded poetry, scrolls that stretch for meters, circular books bound like compasses, triangular volumes that only make sense when held at an angle. Some texts printed entirely in mirrored font meant to be read in reflection. One shelf holds novels written on playing cards, while another contains novellas typed on fabric and wrapped around spindles like ribbons. You step cautiously among the shelves, candlelight flickering. This room hums in a different key. Every object here feels like it's still resisting the rules. They never fit the standard, never got mass printed. They existed on the fringe not because they were wrong, but because they were strange, experimental, sometimes inconvenient, but never unworthy. You pick up a book bound in silk. The pages are dyed shades of twilight, and the ink shimmers like rain on stone. The text reads vertically, then curves spiraling inward like a vortex. The story is about a woman who lives backward in time, experiencing her last breath first and ending in her mother's arms. It's impossible to read quickly. You feel yourself slowing to its rhythm. Another book hums faintly in your hands. Literally. It's been bound with musical notations woven into the text. As you read, a low melody plays in your mind, not remembered, but generated. The book seems to know what key you're feeling. You find a series of folios printed in transparent layers, meant to be stacked in different sequences to tell different versions of the same tale. Depending on the order, the villain might become the hero. Or the story might end on a wedding, a war, or a whisper. One box contains hundreds of small slips of paper, each no larger than a teabag tag. Together, they form a novel. But they are shuffled non-linear, intended to be drawn one at a time like fortunes. You pull 3. They read, "She left the door open just in case." Rain smelled like rosemary that day. He would never know what she forgave. You replace the slips, resisting the urge to keep one in your pocket. In the far corner is a pedestal. Upon it rests a single item, a cube. Each face holds a short scene. When you turn it, the story continues in a different direction. It has no beginning, no ending, only movement. The plaque below it reads, "Choose, and it becomes true." You sit, not out of exhaustion, but to absorb. This department feels like a protest and a love letter at once, a celebration of reading that defies convenience. These formats required effort, presence, collaboration between object and reader. And perhaps that's why they were forgotten, or why they linger. Before you leave, you notice a wall labeled unread. Here, rest books no one ever opened. Experimental works so strange even the curious pass them by. You open one. The title is The Book That Doesn't Wait. As soon as your eyes hit the page, the words begin to fade. You can only read it once. You do. The story is about a lighthouse keeper who trains moths to carry messages across storms. You close the book. The title vanishes from the spine. As you step back into the hallway, you blow out the candle. Smoke curls upward like a sentence deciding where to end. At your desk, the world feels more angular, more surprising. You write, Job includes honoring the unreadable, the inconvenient, the nearly lost. And yes, historically, books have existed in many strange forms. Textiles, carved woodstone tablets, early sound books. In the early 20th century, artists in the Dada and Surrealist movements created anti-books designed to confuse or disorient. Japanese emakimono scrolls blend image and word in continuous narratives. Even now, artists and small presses experiment with unconventional forms like edible books or stories printed on maps or mirrors. Libraries often struggle with how to archive such items. They don't fit standard shelving. They resist classification. Yet they persist. Because stories want to be told even if they arrive in a shape you didn't expect. And sometimes, the book you can't read is still a kind of knowing. Just slower. Just stranger. The library is quieter than usual today. Not silent, never truly silent, but softened. The footsteps are more hesitant. The pages seem to turn themselves more slowly. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the main hall has adopted a more contemplative rhythm. You suspect the building knows that you've reached the final part of something. The end of a story, perhaps. Though around here, endings rarely stay where they're put. There's no note on your desk this time. No assignment, no list, just a folded map you don't remember drawing. It's sketched in soft pencil smudged in places with little arrows and stars marking corridors you've never seen. In the top corner, a title in looping script. The rooms you forgot to visit. Beneath it, a small instruction. Bring nothing. Just come. You follow the map, past the room of interrupted research through the alcove of questions with no answers, down the spiral staircase that wasn't there yesterday. The walls narrow. The lighting dims not out of malice but intimacy, like a story whispering just to you. Finally, you reach a door labeled Final Revisions. It opens without a sound. Inside is a reading room. Circular, wooden, worn. A single chair sits in the middle facing a fireplace that isn't lit but still radiates warmth. Around the room, the shelves are empty, not because there are no books, but because they're all laid out on a long table. Dozens, hundreds, all familiar. You recognize them. They're yours, not books you wrote. Not exactly, but books that passed through your hands, that shaped you, that ruined your sleep, broke your heart, made you laugh at 3 a.m. Stories you forgot until they returned. Passages that stuck. Moments that changed something small but irrevocable. Each book lies open to a page you remember best. One has the line that got you through your worst year. Another, the sentence that made you want to be braver. Another, still the quiet paragraph that made you cry for reasons you couldn't name. In the center of the table is a mirror. But when you look into it, you don't see your reflection. You see scenes from your reading life. The night you stayed up too late, flashlight under covers. The afternoon you read in a tree legs swinging. The winter morning you skipped breakfast just to finish a chapter. The bookshop you visited on your birthday. The library corner where you hid after a terrible exam. You see yourself again and again, not alone, but accompanied by pages. You take a seat. On the desk before you is a final book. No title. Just your name embossed in soft gold. You open it. The first page reads, "Here is what you've kept." Then follows a record not of facts, but of impact. Every time a sentence made you feel less alone. Every time a paragraph gave you permission to be different. Every moment a character showed you who you were or might become. The book isn't long, but it is full. It ends with a note in handwriting you recognize but can't place. This library remembers that you were here, that you read, that you felt, that you mattered. You close the book and place it gently back on the table. The mirror fades. The fireplace hums. The room waits but asks nothing more. When you return to your desk hours later, or perhaps it's minutes, you find a small envelope. Inside is a single slip of paper. It reads, "You can come back any time. You never really left." You write in your notebook, "Job includes saying goodbye." Even when it isn't permanent, And yes, libraries across the world preserve not just stories, but the relationship between reader and text. Marginalia, checkout histories, book club notes, end-of-year lists, farewell letters to favorite authors. These artifacts speak to a deep truth. Stories do not end when the book closes. They ripple, they echo, they linger. Some institutions have begun archiving reader responses as seriously as the books themselves. Emotional cataloging, literary ephemera. Even digital platforms now track the unseen fingerprints of memory, because what we feel while reading matters just as much as what was written. And sometimes, the library's last chapter isn't an ending. It's just a pause. The library dims, not into darkness, but into quiet. A deep, cotton-soft hush like the sound of snow before it falls. You've turned the final page, closed the last cover, and returned your pen to the drawer. For the first time in what feels like centuries, there is no note waiting for you. No drawer creaking open. No hallway beckoning you forward. Just stillness. Just breath. You stand from your desk. The chair creaks like an old friend saying goodbye. As you step into the aisle, you notice that the books around you seem a little softer in their silence, as if they too are resting now. Not because the work is over, but because the story has been heard. You walk the corridors one last time, past the rooms you once feared, past the pages that changed you, past the names you helped remember and the formats you helped forgive. Every corner holds a memory now. Every echo wears your footprint. You have become part of the stacks, not cataloged, not shelved, but known, trusted, kept. You reach the main doors. They open slowly. A breeze slips in, not cold, but curious. Outside, the rain has stopped. The world looks softer. You step out into the light, not sure if you're waking up or just beginning another story. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the library isn't a place. Maybe it's a feeling. A pause between chapters. A breath between words. A candle in the quiet. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.